Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Donna Just Being Real. My channel is all about dating, love, relationships, and toxic relationship advice channel. Alright, so we're going to get into this one here. And we're doing a bit of a recap. Now, today was a long day. I'm not going to do the whole thing. We're just going to focus. I'm going to have to do this in a two-part. I know I said to you I was going to leave y'all alone with the lies for a while, but it was just so crazy. It was just so crazy. Oh my gosh, I got this sewer rat up on top. Oh, we're not focusing on sewer rat. I apologize there. Yeah. So we're going to get into the ring sister, her twin sister. Yeah, that's her right there. All right, so we're gonna get into it. Now today was insane, but it was really good. It was really informative. So the reason why I want to do this, because I like all that psychological stuff. So we got to hear the doctors, and I want to hear what the doctors had to say, and I thought it was very good. So we're gonna hear what I believe was Dr. Gammett, and make sure everybody read the description. I think her name was Jackie Grimmett, something like that, Forensic Psychologist assessment. So she gave her assessment. So we're going to hear what we have to say, but then there was also someone else too that was after the lunch. But we're not going to do that. I'll probably do that tomorrow. Maybe we'll see. Something like that, okay? So we're going to focus on this one. I thought it was very interesting. So we get to learn a lot about borderline personality disorder, narcissistic, and etc., etc. So I will be pausing at times to share my thoughts. But with the part 2, I'm really going to get in more about Al. And I'm going to get into more about Harley, because the second part of it, when the other psychologist went up there, was very interesting. I'm like, Harley. Real quick, let's talk about Harley for just a second. Harley, honey, you definitely was lying on that stand. These are all my thoughts and opinions or whatever. People might think of it differently, but this is how I feel. Yeah, she was lying. All right, so we're going to get into this one. Hopefully I got to. Now, I'm going to have it on speed 1.5. But first I have to say is, make sure you hit the like button, share it on your social media, and also feel free to check out some of my past commentary. My channel is all about dating, love, relationships, and toxic relationships. It's advice channel. So I do things in animation, which I haven't done in a while, but I'm going to get back to it. I use crime stories. I use trials, as all of them as a teaching tool to learn. So we can be aware of all the red flags and be careful out there, because not everybody comes into your life with good intentions. And one thing I have to say is, ladies and gentlemen, when you're out there dating again, you got to be extremely careful who you bring around your children. And this is a case I don't think he did that. Nope, not at all. Not at all. But you can share your thoughts. So we're going to get into this one. I know there's a few people that's in here. All right, because I know I saw Melanie up in there. Melanie, did you read the email? All right, so Melanie up in here. We got Melanie. And then we have Deb. Hugs and kisses to you. All right, and I think I just saw Lovejoy creep up in here through the back door. Oh. See you, girl. Beautiful. I see you. We got 603. We got Lisa up in here. All right, if I miss anybody, please don't be mad and stuff. All right, so let's get into it, because this is really interesting. I love all this psychological stuff. You learn a lot, a lot. And we're also going to talk about the borderline personality disorder, and I want to show a clip about that article, but we'll do another day. All right, Donna, stop talking. Let's get it. Like I said, the speed's on 1.5.
Thank you. May all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury has.
I just want to repeat this because the replay watches. The speed is on 1.5. If you need to slow it down on your end, you can slow it down on your end, the people that's here and the people that's watching replay. And if you need to get in contact with me, check the description and you'll get my email. Let's get it.
Return to the courtroom. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad everybody made it in light of our epic Snowmageddon. Again, has anything occurred since we were last together that causes any of you to believe that you could not continue to serve as a fair and impartial juror in this case? If so, please raise your hand. No response. All right. With that, prosecution, call your next witness, please.
Thanks, John. Good morning. We would call Dr. Jackie Grimmett.
Snuck up on me. I'm sorry. If you would raise your right hand. You swear firm the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Go ahead and have a seat in the witness stand. Please watch your step as you step into the stand. Mr. Young.
Thanks, Judge. Good morning, doctor. How are you?
Morning. Good, thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Jackie Grimmett, Grimmett.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a forensic psychologist.
How long have you been a forensic psychologist?
10 years.
Could you give the jury a little bit of your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in psychology and health, master's degree in counseling, and a doctoral degree in clinical psychology.
And are you working currently?
I am.
What is your profession?
I am in private practice as a forensic psychologist.
And where do you practice? What states?
I live in Hawaii. I practice full time in Colorado.
And are you licensed to practice psychology in both those states?
Yes.
Do you have to be licensed in the field of psychology to perform evaluations and do forensic evaluations?
Yes.
Could you give the jury a little bit of your background with regards to professional memberships that you belong to?
I belong to the American Psychological Association, the Colorado Psychological Association, the Hawaii Psychological Association, and I'm a specialist in the American Board of Forensic Psychology.
And are you a board certified forensic psychologist?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means I've gone through a rigorous peer review process.
The man that's in the back on the left side of your screen, that's the father, the one who's dressed in red. That's Al. Resume.
Involving a written exam, submitting practice samples, and submitting to a 3-hour oral exam with a panel of experts who then attest that I've reached a level of competence in the field of forensic psychology.
It sounds like that's something more than just sending a check to someone and getting a certificate in the mail.
It was a multiple year process.
And what percentage of forensic psychologists are board certified? Do you know?
I think that there's about 3% of psychologists in the country board certified in forensic psychology, and that totals about 350 psychologists in total.
And are you in a position now where you approve others who may be seeking to be board certified?
Yes, I serve on the exam faculty for the board. So I review practice samples and I conduct oral exams.
And so you get to do what you had to
They
do
did to me.
before. You get to evaluate those people.
Yes.
How long have you been doing that?
About a year and a half.
The jury's heard a little bit about what a forensic psychological evaluation is. How many of those have you conducted in your career?
Probably about 1,500.
And 1,500, we're not going to get into those. But have those been both for the court, the prosecution, and defense counsel?
The majority of the work I do is court-ordered. I have done a few evaluations at the request of the prosecution. I have done a fair bit of private evaluation for the defense.
Okay. What about your past professional history? What kind of jobs have you held as a forensic psychologist or a psychologist?
My first job as a psychologist was as a forensic psychologist. I worked at the Colorado Mental Health Institute at Pueblo as a forensic evaluator, doing competency evaluations full-time for about 4.5 years before I left to pursue private practice.
I imagine a lot of those 1,500 evaluations came from that role.
At this point, about a third.
Okay. What about after that? What'd you do?
I've been in private practice, mostly doing competency and sanity work. I do some civil capacity evaluations, undue influence regarding wills for the elderly, some mitigation work for the defense. I both do private practice, second opinion competency evaluations, and I'm also a contractor for the state.
And in your career,
Exactly. What Melanie said today was tedious, but there were some definite good stories. Yes, it was. Harley wouldn't talk to the psychologist. Such a do the right thing, young lady. Oh, that was very interesting. Resume.
have you both performed, we'll rephrase that, but have you treated patients for their psychological issues?
Yes, prior to becoming a psychologist, I was a licensed professional counselor for 10 years, and I treated people doing therapy weekly, mostly returning soldiers at Fort Carson from Afghanistan and Iraq.
Post-traumatic stress symptoms?
Yes.
Is a forensic examination different from what would be called a clinical evaluation as a psychologist?
Yes.
What's the difference?
A clinical evaluation is typically requested by the person coming to seek treatment. They've got symptoms and they're in some discomfort, and you develop a therapeutic relationship with them. You're there to help them. In a forensic evaluation, the person being evaluated is never the person who actually requested the evaluation. It's typically an attorney or the court. There is no therapeutic relationship there. You're not there to help them. You're there to help answer a legal question. So there's no treatment. In a clinical evaluation, you take the patient at their word. What they tell you is their experience, and that's what you treat. In a forensic evaluation, you consider what the person tells you, but you also look for collateral information to support that what they're telling you is genuine, and there's records to document that what they're claiming to be experiencing is genuine.
And have you been qualified as an expert in the field of forensic psychology in the past?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
About 80?
80?
Yes.
And have those all been in Colorado or other states? At this time, we would ask that the court allow Dr. Grimmett to be qualified as an expert in the field of forensic psychology and render opinions in that field.
That's no objection. The witness will be so qualified. Go ahead.
Dr. Grimmett, could you explain to the jury how you became involved in this case?
Excuse me. Yeah, I was approached by the defense to complete a court-ordered second opinion evaluation of competency to proceed.
And when you say court-ordered evaluation, what does that mean?
Well, when somebody raises the issue of competency. The process is the court issues an order and the state has to conduct an initial evaluation. Either attorney can request a second opinion at that point, and the judge then issues an order for the second opinion to take place.
And really what I wanted to get to is, were you aware that there'd already been a competency evaluation done in this case when you got this order to do the second evaluation?
Yes.
Okay. And is that common practice based on your experience?
I'm always aware there's been a previous evaluation.
The fact that the defense requested you, how does that impact your evaluation in this case?
I try to take an impartial stance in every case. My job is to help give the court information that they can use to come to an ultimate opinion on competency. In pursuit of that, I contact the defense counsel and the prosecution to get their input. And I'm always considering if the other person, if the other side had asked me to do the evaluation, would my opinion be the same? And I try to check any non-impartiality I might be experiencing.
Okay. Could you give, well, let me ask you, have you done insanity evaluations in your career as well?
Yes.
Could you let the jury know what the difference between a competency evaluation is and an insanity evaluation in a forensic setting?
Sure. Succinctly, a competency evaluation is an evaluation of someone's present state. So the day I meet with them, how are they doing? Are there any impediments to them being able to proceed with their case? An insanity evaluation is a retrospective evaluation. So you're assessing how they were doing at the time of the offense, not how they're doing now.
And so with regards to this case, did you conduct an insanity evaluation?
No.
And would you need to do an insanity evaluation before you could render opinions with regards to Mrs. Stauch's sanity at the time of the crime?
Absolutely.
So you can't do that, right?
Right.
All right. I want to make sure everyone knows that before we go forward. So let's talk about the competency evaluation for this particular case. What did you receive in preparation for your competency evaluation?
I received the court order. I received the previous evaluation. I received discovery in the case, which was voluminous. Included videos. I received jail medical records and recordings of jail phone calls between Ms. Stauch and other parties.
A lot of information, I take.
Love Joy, I love it too. Isn't it great? I love when they have psychiatrists on the stand. You learn a lot. I love it. I love it. I love it too. All right, let's get back to it. Let everybody let me know. Is this 1.5 way too fast? You want me to put it down to 1.25, or are you pretty good? You got it. Let me know. Somebody in the chat, just let me know. Resume.
A lot of information.
There was a large amount of police reports and what's called discovery in this case. Did you review all of that?
Yes.
Now, there's been reference to the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual that I think everyone knows that psychologists and psychiatrists use to evaluate people. Within that manual, would you find competency?
No.
Is that a medical diagnosis?
No.
Is that a legal term?
Yes.
What about insanity?
Same.
Legal term?
Legal term.
It's not in the DSM-5?
No.
So how do you go about determining whether or not someone's competent to proceed? What do you look for? Kind of run the jury through that process.
So the statute outlines what competency to proceed evaluation entails. The requirements are that the defendant needs to have the ability to have a factual and rational understanding of the proceedings, and also to have an ability to consult with their attorney to assist in their defense. So in pursuit of that, I would conduct a clinical interview, look at their current mental status, ask them very specific questions about the legal process and their case in order to establish whether or not they had that understanding and ability, and if not, why not? And that why not has to relate to mental illness.
And so why is it that you need to look at the police reports and the discovery in a criminal case in conjunction with talking to whoever's being evaluated? So
in order to assess whether the defendant has a rational and factual understanding of the proceedings, that includes their case, I have to understand their case well enough to know whether or not they understand their case.
And so prior, I'm assuming you eventually sat down with Ms. Stauch and had a forensic interview with her?
Yes.
Prior to that, did you review the materials in this case, the police reports and so forth?
Yes.
Did you have any concerns about Mrs. Stauch's credibility going into that forensic interview?
Credibility is always something to consider in a criminal case. There's always high stakes, especially in a case like this. There seemed to be a lot of inconsistencies in the records that I was reviewing that made me question what kind of presentation she was going to have when I met with her.
And I should have asked you this before, but do you recall when you got the court order to do the evaluation?
I know it's in my report. The date of the order is in my report. I don't know off the top of my head.
If your report was filed on January 7th of 2021, obviously it would have been sometime before that.
Yes, I met with Ms. Stauch in December 2020. So the order would have come in probably a month or two before then.
Okay, that's fine. So you said you met with Ms. Stauch on December of 2020. Do you see Ms. Stauch in the courtroom today? Could you please point her out and describe what she's wearing?
She's sitting in between two attorneys with teal.
May the record reflect the identification of the defendant subject to cross-examination.
The record will so reflect. Go ahead.
How long did you meet with Ms. Stauch?
I met with her for about 3 hours and 40 minutes.
And did you meet with her one time or on different times?
I met with her once.
And could you just give, I know it's a long process of the forensic interview, but could you give the jury a little idea of how the interview started and what your first impressions were of Ms. Stauch when you started the forensic interview?
So whenever I sit down with a defendant, I give them a notification of purpose. Because it's a court-ordered evaluation, they don't really have the ability to not participate. They can choose not to participate. I still have to do an evaluation of that person. So I explained that there's no confidentiality, that I'm not there to help them. I'm here to help the court. What's going to happen with the report that I get, those kind of things. And then I checked to make sure that she understood what I had to say, and she understood the context of our meeting, and she indicated that she did. She made some complaints, I believe, about her attorneys and feeling it was a conspiracy, but understood what we were doing. And then I proceeded to ask her background questions, trying to establish what her social and mental health history had been in order to give some context to the current day. And that took a long time. Ms. Stauch is very verbose and likes to expand on her answers. So the interview took a long time. And then I had some concerns based on the prior testing from the original evaluation, where she produced invalid results on some tests, and the inconsistencies that I was seeing both in the records and in meeting with her, that I administered some tests to assess for the genuineness of her responding. And then I proceeded with the legal questions at the end.
Based on your history in this profession, I would imagine that you've seen people with some serious mental illness. We talked about the post-traumatic stress disorders that our soldiers have when they come back from Afghanistan and things like that. Did you note any of that on your initial impression of Ms. Stauch?
Did I note what specifically?
Whether or not she had a severe mental illness based on your initial conversation?
No, I did not believe she had a severe mental illness.
Had you seen that in your past where you're treating someone and the moment you see them, you know something's off? For instance, you might be experiencing some sort of psychosis or things like that.
Yes, sometimes it's very obvious from the get-go, and sometimes it takes some time.
Could you give the jury an example of something that you've seen in your past where right away you knew there was some psychosis going on?
Sometimes as soon as somebody steps into the room, they're already having a conversation that you're not part of, and you try to interrupt them and orient them to what is happening, and it's as if you're not there. And the things that they're talking about are not apparently real. Conspiracies, people following them, all kinds of things.
Did you see anything like that with Ms. Stauch when you initially started talking to her?
She engaged in some behaviors. I think I mentioned in my report that she was humming to herself. She was putting her head on the wall. Her affect, which is what her expression of emotion, didn't really seem to fit what was happening. She seemed happier than she should have been. And she, at some point, turned around to talk to somebody else and then turned around to tell me what was happening.
What was that all about?
She said that she was talking to a vampire and then resumed conversation with me.
We're going to talk about the vampires later in your testimony. Earlier, you indicated that you had some concerns about some prior psychological testing with regards to your interview with Ms. Stauch. Could you expand on that? What did you mean, and what were these psychological testing that you had concerns with?
So the previous evaluators had administered an MMPI and a PAI. I can say what those are if you need them for the record.
Sure, why don't we talk about that? First, we're hearing about it.
The MMPI is a Minnesota multiphasic personality interview. I think they gave version 2 or 2 revised format, I'm not sure. And the PAI is a personality assessment inventory. So those are long kind of forced choice self-report measures to look for psychopathology, any mental illness symptoms that people are experiencing. And you can answer them in such a way, there's what we call validity scales, which assess how genuinely you're responding. And you can answer in such a way that the protocols are not interpretable because it appeared somebody was trying to make themselves look worse than they were, or they were answering in a way that most people don't answer. And that's what happened with Ms. Stauch.
And do you recall reading is there a computer printout that's associated with the answers that Ms. Stauch gave, talking about various scales and whether or not she's feigning psychological symptoms, that kind of
Yeah, you can get a computer printout of the results, yes.
Do you recall what the printout said with regards to the MMPI-2 that Ms. Stauch did with the prior evaluators?
I just remember it was uninterpretable because it was invalid responding.
Do you know whether or not she, based on the psychological testing, and was it Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray that did the prior competency evaluation?
So Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray did the prior competency evaluation. They had a colleague, Dr. Hashimoto, actually administer the test.
And is that the test that you looked at prior to your interview?
Yes.
Did the results of that test indicate that her symptoms were the equivalent of someone who should have been in a psychiatric hospital? Serious psychiatric issues?
I don't recall that it said that specifically. Typically, when a protocol is uninterpretable, I don't delve too much more into that because the information you get is not good information you can rely on.
Okay, well, we'll ask Dr. Torres about that. You indicated that you reviewed materials prior to this interview. Did you review the notes from the mental health staff at the jail regarding Ms. Stauch prior to your interview with her?
Yes.
Let's talk about those for a moment. Why did you review those notes?
When you're doing a competency evaluation, you just get a snapshot in time of somebody. You know, I met with Ms. Stauch for 3 hours and 40 minutes, but she may function differently outside of that environment. So I'm looking for information on how she does in general, not just considering my observations. People that have more contact with her might have different impressions, and those are important.
What was your impression of the notes as chronologically it led up to the point where you're doing a competency evaluation, starting from the moment she went into the jail on March 5th, 2020, up until December 2020 when you're interviewed?
They typically indicated that Ms. Stauch was complaining of anxiety and nightmares when she was receiving medications for those. I think from memory, she received those medications fairly quickly. And then in May, she had requested to come off of one of them because she didn't want to take it anymore, and the jail staff accommodated that. So she was taking one anti-anxiety medication when I met with her, which was Buspar. She had consistently been observed to not have serious symptoms of mental illness. There were quite frequent reviews of whether or not she was having hallucinations, complaining of hallucinations, suicidal, homicidal thoughts, those kind of things. She was consistently described as not experiencing any psychotic symptoms like that, although she had filed kites that were rather incoherent, didn't make sense, and the staff had noted that her behavior didn't match the kites.
Was there anything in the jail notes that led you to believe that perhaps she may have had a serious mental illness prior to your interview with her in December 2020?
In the jail notes specifically? No, I think when she came into the jail, she didn't report any mental health history. And as her stay progressed, she started making comments about having been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, PTSD, and multiple personality disorder, as she called it. But that didn't feature until November.
And was that after she had raised competency in this case?
Yes.
Sure, I'm going to object to the term that Ms. Stauch raised competency that was raised by her prior attorneys.
Did you also review Ms. Stauch's jail calls, or at least some of her jail calls that she had with various people while she was incarcerated?
I did.
And why did you review the jail calls?
It allows me to extend my observations of her in a somewhat more natural context where she's not interfacing with a mental health professional, but she's talking to people that she knows. And the whole point of reviewing all these different sources of information is looking for consistency. If someone is impacted by something, you would expect them to be consistently impacted by that, not dependent on the context. So that's the purpose of reviewing those things.
I want to come back to the vampires now that we're talking about the jail calls. Did you know about Ms. Stauch's conversations about vampires based on the jail calls that you listened to prior to meeting her in December 2020?
There was not a lot of content in the jail calls. I believe maybe one or two contained some statements, but not to the degree that she discussed with me.
What did you find relevant about the jail calls that you listened to?
There was between who she was talking to and what she was saying. She was talking to people and saying illogical things, saying that she wasn't doing well, losing her mind, those kind of things, and then consecutively calling her daughter and giving her very clear instructions on how to manage bank accounts, job interviews, what can you get for me, very clear, coherent requests that didn't make sense.
And were these phone calls you said consecutively? Are they literally back to back? One moment she's talking crazy to someone, next moment she's talking to Harley, her daughter, and having a normal conversation?
Certainly on the same day.
Earlier, you testified that in a competency evaluation, you look at the statute and you make a determination of where you're going to go within that statute, I take it? That's a bad question. I'm going to rephrase it. Going into the competency evaluation, are you looking to diagnose her with a mental illness?
It's required for a competency evaluation to include a diagnosis. I don't go into a competency evaluation to diagnose someone. Some people don't have diagnoses, but I'm simultaneously looking at their competency related abilities and whether or not they're experiencing any mental health symptoms and formulating as I go along whether or not there's a barrier to them being able to meet the requirements to proceed.
Are you essentially gathering facts, looking at those facts and weighing those facts to what the law is with regards to competency and then rendering opinion back to the court?
Yes.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that's much more succinctly than I said it.
So during this interview, what are you looking for when you're talking to her? And why do you not rely on everything she's telling you with regards to vampires and other things that we're going to talk about?
For the reasons I mentioned, it's a forensic evaluation. There's often motivation to present yourself a certain way to achieve a certain outcome. So I'm trying to weigh what her experience is, what others have experienced with her. My goal is always, is there a barrier to competency? That's really all I'm looking for. Can you do this? If not, why not?
And earlier you mentioned some things that were mentioned in the jail notes, but did Ms. Stauch tell you what she felt her mental illnesses were?
Well, she mentioned bipolar disorder to me. She did not ever say to me, I have dissociative identity disorder. And she told me briefly about some trauma she'd experienced, but I don't remember her explicitly stating I have PTSD.
Let's talk about bipolar disorder first. Did you do anything to either diagnose her with that or rule it out, or what did you do with the bipolar disorder information?
So I noticed from the first competency evaluation, they offered a rule out diagnosis of bipolar disorder, which means that there's not enough information to say yes or no. So I considered that in meeting with her, and bipolar disorder was something she mentioned in the jail record, and it's something she mentioned to me. As part of all competency evaluations, I go through many different symptoms of disorders to see what somebody might be experiencing that they don't know is a mental illness. She said she was bipolar and described being impulsive all her life and being hyper, having mania, as she called it, for like a few minutes to a few hours. And those are not consistent with a bipolar illness.
Needless to say, you didn't diagnose her with bipolar disorder?
Excuse me. So the first evaluators offered a rule out, and in my evaluation, I ruled it out, saying I did not believe she had that.
You mentioned a dissociative identity disorder. How did that come up in your conversation with Ms. Stauch?
She mentioned two instances whereby she asserted that she had found herself in places that she hadn't planned on being. And she also told me that she had various different personalities, and she named them for me.
Let's talk about the personalities first. What personalities did she name to you that she had?
She named Taylor, Keisha, Jasmine, and I believe Jasper.
Okay. I'm sorry, Taylor, Jasmine, Tisha,
Yeah,
and Jasper?
Jasper.
Okay. Did she ever mention Victoria?
No,
Did she ever mention Harmony?
no,
Did she ever mention Christina?
no,
Little Lucia?
no,
What about Maria Sanchez?
no.
So as she's saying these things to you, did you see any signs that she was changing personalities or turning into someone she's not?
No.
Based on what she's telling you, did you consider dissociative identity disorder as a diagnosis?
I considered it.
Tell the jury about that. What did you consider and what did you do to either diagnose her with it or rule it out or however you approach that?
Dissociative identity disorder is a very rare disorder. Somewhere between 0 and 1% of people have it. It's a very destructive, disabling disorder. People tend to be very high consumers of mental health services when they have DID. It can be very frightening because people don't know what's happening to them. They feel very strange and they can't explain what that is. So there's a lot of mental distress that goes along with that. And those people typically have very poor functioning, can't hold down jobs, can't hold down relationships, just not very productive. In talking with Ms. Stauch, she did not describe any such dysfunction. Her history didn't support that. And in describing the alters, which is what those different personalities are clinically referred to, she had selected names for them based on things she liked and aspirations she had, which is inconsistent with this disorder where typically the alters present themselves to you. You don't rate them and you don't name them kind of whimsically. So I just didn't see any of the impairment that would be expected to go along with the claims that she was making.
If you wouldn't mind pulling that microphone a little closer to you, just to make sure everyone can hear you.
Sorry, the chair is tilted and
The microphone moves, the chair doesn't.
okay, is that better?
Everybody else, it's okay.
So can you expand on this disorder? What have you seen anyone with this disorder in your career?
I don't believe I've ever seen anyone with DID.
Based on, what do you base your opinions on then? Is it the DSM-5 and
Research.
research? Is this a type of disorder that would be hidden from relatives and family members?
I mean, with the expected dysfunction that I described, I don't know how somebody would be that impacted by disorder. Nobody would know something was wrong.
And is it, based on what you've read and your experience, is it common for family members to actually seek help for someone who's having blackouts and not knowing what's happening and forget, things, significant things are happening in their lives, they're not able to function because of this type of stuff?
I would certainly expect that there would be some intervention sought.
See any of that with Ms. Stauch?
I wasn't provided any information to suggest that she had been a high consumer of mental health services or that anybody had concerns along those lines.
And just so we're clear, in a competency evaluation, does it end with a diagnosis of a mental disorder?
No, I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Well, in your evaluations, or if you diagnose someone with, let's say, schizophrenia, is that the end of the evaluation? You say, oh, she's got, or she or he's got schizophrenia, we stop.
Okay, I understand. Sorry.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. So the profession of psychology considers mental illness, but the statute, the legal system considers mental disability. So I'm assessing for a mental disability. And the difference between those two is a mental illness is what you've heard of, depression.
I just want to pause for a second. I want to share something. And this is something I've always, thought about and everything. And something that happened today. We know what he was talking about, everything with the psychologists and stuff. Whenever a person, if you're going to a therapist, right? Psychologist, therapist, psychiatrist, or whatever, right? You have to make sure you find someone who really specializes in your situation. If you going somewhere because you feel like you're a victim of narcissist abuse, you need to find a psychologist who knows a lot about narcissist abuse. It's the same thing. Like if your foot hurts, you go to the doctor. Your doctor's going to send you to the podiatrist because they specialize in your feet. If something going on with your eyes, they're going to send you to the ophthalmologist. Am I saying right? With eye doctor. Specialized because everybody's different. If you're a victim of, SA, I guess that's an SA, you need to speak to someone who specializes in those kind of victims. Because not every psychologist, not saying they don't know their work, but they know just the bare minimum. They don't really know how deep it is. So sometimes you go to some of these psychologists and psychiatrists or whoever you go to, counselor, they not specializing, so they you be misdiagnosed and they not really going in deeper. That's why they say a lot of people that I was reading articles about it. A lot of people that go to doctors and they tell them, oh, you got bipolar. But come to find out, they really don't have bipolar. They have borderline personality disorder. And that's two completely different things. So you really need to find, it's just like you shopping around. Tell them your situation. I mean, how many patients have you had that dealing with what I'm going through? If you're going there for ADHD or whatever, do they know much about ADHD? If it's your children, you want to go to someone who specializes with children who's dealing with narcissism or sociopath or whatever. I'm just coming up with stuff. So you have to go to a person who specializes that deals with that, because lots of times you're going to be misdiagnosed. That's why with your insurance, they give you a whole list of different people that you can go to shop around. If you ain't comfortable with the one you are, go somewhere else. It's nothing personal, but you don't seem to understand what I'm going through. And it's not like they don't know. They just know the bare basics. Of course, they learn all this in college. They have to learn all this. But what do they really specialize in? And can they help you in your situation? All right, let's get back to it. Reason.
Anxiety, schizophrenia. Within those disorders, everybody's going to experience them differently. So if two people are diagnosed with depression, you don't know what their experiences are or how impaired they are. A mental disability says, okay, they have a mental illness, but they're disabled by it. So it's to a high degree. It's not sufficient to have an illness. It has to be impacting functioning, and that in a specific way for competency, and that renders it a mental disability.
And is that the same for an insanity evaluation? Does it end with a mental illness diagnosis, or do you have to go further, similar to what you talked about in the competency?
It's a slightly different definition, but yes, it's not sufficient to just have a mental illness.
I just want to talk about the vampires some more. Did you talk to Ms. Stauch about her experience with vampires during your forensic interview?
I did.
Tell the jury about that.
Ms. Stauch introduced a vampire called Justice. She said that there was a button in her cell that she could summon Justice, Jasper, perhaps Patrick, if I remember correctly. She said she had been introduced to vampires when she lived in Alaska previously, and they used to go door to door like Jehovah's Witnesses. And she didn't really offer them in any kind of meaningful way, like wasn't explaining anything or trying to use that information necessarily, but she certainly referenced them throughout the interview.
Did she tell you where she got these names for these so-called vampires she's talking about?
She directed me to the movie Twilight.
And did you find out that these names were from the movie Twilight or the book series involved in Twilight?
Yeah, a few of them for sure. I'm not familiar with the series myself, but I Googled. She talked about a vampire council, and the name of the council was taken directly from that series. And then a couple of the names for sure came from there as well.
And is that something that would be common with someone who has dissociative identity disorder, that they would be able to tell you exactly where the names of other personalities came from and things like that?
Are you drawing a connection between the vampires and DID? Because I got a bit confused there.
No, I'll ask you a different question. What relevance, if any, did that have in your evaluation? The fact that she's talking about vampires that came from a movie.
Well, certainly if somebody's talking about vampires and that appears real to them, that could signify that they're experiencing mental illness. So I looked further to see, I'm looking for consistency again. So it was notable that she said that she had been interfacing with these vampires since Alaska, but she made no mention of them to the previous evaluators. And she also didn't mention them throughout her jail stay until several months in. I think I lost track of your question. I'm sorry.
Well, what's the significance? It's one thing to say that I talk to vampires and I see vampires. What's the significance of her saying clarification? Well, these vampires came from a movie.
Right. So that's not consistent with a mental illness. It sounded like a fabrication. If people are talking to vampires, I would expect them to have their own unique aspects to them and something unique to the individual that would make sense in a greater scheme of how they see the world. And it just seemed like she was conveying a story essentially from fiction.
And did she bring this up on her own, or did you ask her questions that might trigger that answer?
I didn't ask her any questions about vampires initially.
Okay. And I forget the term you used to describe how she was talking to you, but she likes to talk, for lack of a better way to say it, right?
Yes.
Would she just volunteer information to you and change subjects as you're talking to her?
She didn't change subjects a whole lot. I didn't get the impression from her that she wasn't following my line of thought. She was telling a coherent story. She just gave far more information than was necessary to answer the question. Okay.
Did you perform any psychological testing with Ms. Stauch?
I administered 2 measures to assess for genuine responding for her mental illness symptoms.
And what were those measures?
The MFAST, which is a Miller Forensic Assessment of Symptoms test, and the SIRS-2, which is a structured interview of reported symptoms.
And what were the results of those psychological tests?
So she exceeded the cutoff on the MFAST. It's a screening measure for feigning. And feigning means the intentional exaggeration or production of mental illness symptoms. So she crossed over the threshold, indicating that she might in fact be feigning. But because it's a screening measure and it wasn't 100% sure, I gave another more comprehensive measure. On that measure, there's several scales. It looks at different aspects of feigning. Are you reporting symptoms that you're not manifesting observable behavior of? Are you reporting inconsistent symptoms, rare combinations of symptoms? So she just elevated one scale.
I want to say some Lovejoy to your thing. You said, I know her ex-husband must be like, who the bleep did I marry? Exactly, because she'll date long enough, you would have found out. But if I'm correct, what I'm hearing, Lovejoy, his mother works, I guess whatever job that she has, she deals with people with, mental disorders or whatever, right? So she kept warning her son. And you had to see the signs. I don't know. It's just something about it, had to see signs, because she's the type of person I can see her complaining. I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted, kids, with the personalities and stuff. He had to see something, but he swept it up under the rug, because I think he's a little bit selfish. That's why I say this poor baby had to deal with a lot of selfish people around him, a lot of toxic people. I'm not saying, oh, nobody come in here getting all crazy. Oh, Donna, you bashing the father, you bashing the victims, and da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm so sick and tired of it. No. We're going to call it like it is. All right? There's a cause and effect for everything. This man cheated on his wife. He's running around with this hussy, married her, took away the kids from the baby mother, whatever the deal is, making her sit here and watch your kids all the time. If you'd have dated her long enough, you'd have realized she was cuckoo. But he was too much into his world. And if I'm correct, wasn't he out here cheating on Satan's daughter? So what's going on, sir? What's going on? See, the point I'm just trying to make is, as parents, our actions could affect our children. Our job is to protect the children. And like I said 1,000,000 times, I know darn well that those children have said something to their father. She's mean. She hollers too much. Something. There's no way. But a lot of parents, they just sweep it up under the rug. They don't care, because they just have to have somebody. They put their children last. No, I'm sorry. When you have children, first is God, then is your children, then you. If you don't want to, put your kids before you, people don't need to be having kids. I'm just saying. Yep. But if you date long enough, ladies and gentlemen, you will find out who the heck you with. But you can't be with somebody for 4 months and marry them and think, oh, you just know them. This poor baby around all these nutcases. Everybody running around here worrying about themselves. Well, I'm just saying. Let me get off my soapbox. No, I'm not going to get off my soapbox. I got more to say, but a little bit later. All right, reason. Oh, wait a minute. I just see somebody creep through the back door. Carrie just creeped through the back door. Girl, Carrie, this is why I be hanging out in the daytime at work. I'm watching over there. Oh, she does a phenomenal job. She got that OBS thing going so she can get zoomed into this with this monster right here. The ring girl. The ring girl. Y'all seen the other day with her with the ponytail? That was really interesting. So check out her channel. She has great content, so she's covering this in the daytime. So I'll be over there, ladies and gentlemen. That's where I be at. Thank you, girl, for popping over here. Thank you. Resume.
On that test, suggesting probable feigning, but on the test overall, it was indeterminate.
In your report, it indicates that she yielded a total score of 12. Do you remember what test that was on?
That was on the impasse.
And what does that mean to you as a psychologist?
So the cutoff in the manual is 6. So if you score anything above 6, it's presumed feigning. But because it's a screening measure, there's a lot of false positives. So they suggest you do more testing. So it's out of 25. If somebody scores over 16, it's like 100% rate of also elevating the SIRS. So at 16, you don't have to give the SIRS as well. So 12, it was certainly elevated. I had concerns, but I wanted to be thorough. I didn't want to just, it's a very prejudicial term to say somebody's feigning or malingering.
Sure.
So I just was being prudent.
Okay. Well, in your report, you indicate that such a score is highly suggestive of malingered psychopathology and indicates the need for further assessment. What did you mean by that?
And that's taken from the manual. So because it is high, most people don't get that score by accident. However, because it's a screening measure, it's not very sensitive. You're going to get false positives. People are going to look like they're feigning when they're not feigning in that scoring range. So that's why more testing is done.
What does the term malingering mean?
Malingering, excuse me, I'm sorry. Malingering is like feigning where you're intentionally exaggerating your symptoms, but with malingering, there's an added element of the presumption of trying to obtain a secondary gain.
Did you see that in this case?
It certainly seemed that Ms. Stauch was presenting symptoms that she didn't appear to have. I can never know if somebody is trying to achieve a goal or not. So I didn't offer an opinion on malingering, but certainly there were suggestions that she was not as impaired as she was portraying.
Did you diagnose Ms. Stauch with anything or any mental disorder out of the DSM-5 as a result of your competency evaluation?
My diagnostic impressions were that she had some personality dysfunction, both with traits of borderline personality and narcissistic personality, but not meeting threshold for either full disorder.
Love Lovejoy, don't they? I agree wholeheartedly, Don. She probably put a spell on what's called that Jezebel spell. Jezebel. Sadly, some men like the crazy woman. Yeah, they do. They say the sex is so phenomenal. I bet you the reason why he got caught up with this woman because it was the sex. That's what it was. It was either his ex-wife used to give him that kind of sex and she stopped, or she never gave it to him. But when he came along and met this little chick at the baseball game and she started doing these blanks, he lost his mind. See what I'm saying? This is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about men. Weakness is sex. Sex. Put in the chat if y'all disagree with me. Hey, I stand to be corrected. Tell me if I'm wrong. I doubt you can. All right, resume.
And I offered a rule out of PTSD versus an unspecified anxiety disorder. They just didn't have enough information. And given that it wasn't a clinical information and I wasn't there to help her, I didn't want to probe too much into her trauma.
Did that have any impact on your ultimate conclusion with regard to competency, either of these diagnoses?
Well, those diagnoses would not really reach the threshold of a mental disability.
Is that why you didn't go further and try to rule out post-traumatic stress?
Whether or not she had post-traumatic stress, she did not demonstrate functional impairment as it related to competency. So for my purposes, it wasn't important.
Okay. So what does it mean when you say other specified personality disorder with borderline and narcissistic features? Can you break that down for the jury?
So personality disorders, just like other clinical disorders, have certain criteria that need to be met. And you have to have so many. I believe there might be 7, and you have to have 5 of 7 for each one. So in my impressions of her, she had a couple of features of borderline personality disorder. She was impulsive. She had some kind of push-pull relationships. I don't know what Dr. Moore testified to yesterday, but there was insisting that she saw Dr. Moore, and then Dr. Moore would show up and she'd refuse to see her. That's quite consistent with the borderline personality. And the same for narcissistic personality. Those features are typically a sense of entitlement, grandiosity, a lack of empathy are 3 big ones. Ms. Stauch told me on 2 occasions during the interview that she lacked empathy and she didn't experience people's thoughts and feelings. She had grandiosity throughout our meeting where she touted her accomplishments, her intellect. She was refusing to meet with people that didn't have the highest credentials. She didn't want to meet with social workers. She wanted to meet with people with higher degrees in order to talk about her problems. Wasn't sure that she met all the criteria for the disorder. So I was just trying to convey my goal in an evaluation is to try to help the person reading it experience what I experienced meeting with her. And her personality was very much at the forefront of our interactions. So that's what I was trying to convey.
Did she ever refer to you as being an actress?
She made a comment. She said, "I think you're an actor." And then she just continued talking to me. Like she didn't really have the concern.
Was that about the time you were introducing yourself and saying what your role was, or at what point did that come up?
No, it was somewhere in the middle.
Okay. There's a couple things I want to talk about, the borderline, the personality disorder diagnosis that you have in your report. Are you familiar with the term transient episodes of psychosis?
Yes.
What is that, and what does that mean?
Well, transient means it comes and goes. The psychosis, part of the DSM, the psychosis that can go along with borderline personality disorder is typically related to fears of abandonment. The disorder itself is an attachment disorder where people, the primary goal is to not feel abandoned. So there's these desperate attempts to keep people in your life, at the same time pushing them away. So the transient episodes of psychosis that the DSM refers to is kind of a paranoia about abandonment that might manifest like you text your loved one, they don't text back as quickly as you think they should, and you start thinking that they're leaving you. And then you go into a spiral thinking that the relationship is over, and then they text you again and they were busy, and then you're like, oh, I'm fine now. That would be considered a transient episode of paranoia.
Okay. Seems like that's pretty common, at least. I hear about that on occasion. Did you see any of that with Ms. Stauch during your evaluation?
No.
Is that something that are you capable of ruling that out as a symptom or being anything to do with Ms. Stauch?
It wasn't something I observed during my interview. She has personality dysfunction that I wouldn't say I would rule it out as ever being possible happening. I didn't see it firsthand.
So it didn't come up?
No.
Right. I want to talk to you a little bit about what she, let me ask you this. Did she talk about Gannon and Gannon's death?
A little bit, yes.
Did she talk about feelings that she wanted to bring him back to life?
Feeling that she could bring him back to life.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to ask you that. Tell the jury about that. What did she say about feeling that she could bring Gannon back to life?
She described holding some religious beliefs based on a local pastor of a church here in Colorado Springs who purportedly had brought somebody back to life at some point in time. And she believed that Gannon could meet that same outcome based on those religious beliefs.
That was kind of weird to me. I mean, how did that come into play in your evaluation?
Well, it's an unusual belief that I obviously explored further. The clinically, it kind of appeared to be a bit delusional to me. However, religious beliefs by definition are not delusions. The DSM has an exclusion. If it's a commonly held belief in the subculture of religion, then it's not a delusional belief. So I chalked it up to subscribing to religious beliefs that weren't in the mainstream.
Did she talk to you about her upbringing in North Carolina and her religious beliefs as a child as she was brought up in North Carolina?
No.
Okay. Did she talk to you about Tupac?
Briefly.
What did she say about Tupac?
At the same time that she was talking about Gannon being able to come back to life, she also said she believed in the conspiracy of Tupac Shakur not being dead, actually.
And Tupac Shakur is who?
He was a rap artist that was famously murdered in a very public way.
And so was this in conjunction with talking about Gannon?
So she think Tupac's alive, and just like people think with Elvis, who else is another one out here they think is alive? Interesting. Resume.
Possibly bringing him back to life based on what the conspiracy was going on with Tupac and his murder?
Yes.
Are you familiar with what diagnosis Dr. Gray and Dr. Torres gave Ms. Stauch in their first competency evaluation?
In their first competency evaluation, yes.
Is it similar to what your diagnosis was?
I believe it was very similar, except they had the added rule out of bipolar disorder.
Is that a coincidence, or did you tell us about how that might happen? Did you consult with them at all on your diagnosis, or was your diagnosis independent of what their diagnosis was?
I did not consult with them. You know, you would hope that when several mental health professionals meet with someone, there's going to be consistency across what they believe. That's what the DSM is for. It helps to guide us, gives us a common language to talk about things. You know, my impression of Ms. Stauch was that she had heavier narcissistic features than borderline. I'm not sure what the other doctors' impressions were, but we saw the same constellation of symptoms.
Was that surprising to you that you had the same diagnosis than they did?
No, it happens often.
Okay. I can just have a second, Your Honor.
Me.
I want to ask you a question about some phrasing in your report and just expand on that. On page 22 of your report, you indicate that her presentation is better explained by the maladaptive features of her personality, which includes efforts to control her situation and obtain emotional relief. Do you recall saying that in your report?
Yes.
What is that? What does that mean?
Is it okay if I refer to my report?
Absolutely. Page 22, last paragraph.
So the maladaptive features of her personality that I'm referring to are the borderline and narcissistic personality characteristics that I've outlined. Can you point me to the paragraph?
Sure. It's the last paragraph on page 22. It would be the second sentence in that paragraph.
Okay, thank you. So the symptoms that she was presenting to me, like having the personalities and having conversations with vampires, all the things that we've talked about so far seem to be an effort to achieve something for her. And my impression was that she was trying to feel better. She was trying to make sense of her situation. She's trying to deal with the reality of her situation. And considering that context, that seemed a better explanation of why she was making these efforts to portray herself in certain ways to meet that goal. Because of her personality structure, it wasn't in a very perhaps methodical or logical way. It wasn't perhaps ideal for her to get what she needed. But people with personality dysfunction don't tend to do things in a straight line. It was just there was an absence of mental illness, but some behavior that I needed to explain.
He had to know. Because if his mama knew and was telling him, you laying with this woman, you've been with her more than your mother have, and she picked up on it, he had to know. He had to know. I'm just saying. Resume.
In your opinion, did Ms. Stauch have a mental disability or developmental disability that prevented her from understanding what's going on in the courtroom?
No.
Did she have a mental disability or developmental disability that prevented her from working with her attorneys and proceeding forward in the court case?
In my opinion, no.
And is that why you came up with the ultimate conclusion within your report?
The ultimate conclusion that she was competent to proceed. And it's an opinion. The court has the ultimate conclusion.
Good point. That was your opinion.
Yes.
And it was based on everything that we talked about just now?
Yes.
Is there anything else significant that you would like to share with the jury about your evaluation of Ms. Stauch?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. If I can just have a second, Your Honor. There's one thing I forgot to cover with you, and dissociative identity disorder. The first part of that is disassociation. Could you tell the jury what that is and what that means from your standpoint?
Dissociation is kind of losing track of the present momentarily. It can manifest in a variety of ways. Many of you probably experienced driving down the highway and finding yourself passing an exit and you don't remember the 3 exits prior. That's dissociation. You're still focused, you're still driving, you're still being safe, but your attention was somewhere else. So that would be kind of an adaptive, benign experience. In the extreme, dissociation happens maybe in the context of a trauma that's occurring where the physical body is being exposed to something very terrible and the mind is able to go somewhere else to separate itself, so to not have to experience what the body is experiencing.
And I imagine you may have seen some severe disassociating features with some of the soldiers that you evaluated early on in your career with some post-traumatic stress issues that were going on during battle, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're talking about, those severe versus everyday disassociations that we may experience?
Yeah, just with anything, most things in the DSM, they're all symptoms. We all experience most of them. They become a problem when they impact your functioning. So dissociation is a normal thing when you're doing repetitive things. It's a problem when it starts interfering with your life, when you're needing to be somewhere and psychologically you're somewhere else, or it's causing a lot of distress for you.
Thank you, Gannon. Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Cross-examination. Thank you.
Dr. Grimmett, how are you?
Morning, good, thank you.
Kind of, okay, water some gas really. I kind of pick up where Mr. Young left off and talking about the disassociation, in general. And I think you said it's everybody to some degree disassociates from time to time.
Yes.
And how the mind does it or the exact mechanisms, it's somewhat unclear, but it somewhat has to do, at least my understanding, is it's where memories are stored. And so memories may be stored in places not necessarily easily retrievable.
I'm not sure that's specific to dissociation, but that does happen.
Yes.
I guess I would need a clearer question.
Well, I guess, for example, one part of disassociation is, a person comes home, from work, they immediately get into a heated argument with their spouse, and they can't remember where they left their car keys. But sometimes if they may go back to that emotional state of anger, then they may be able to, that memory may be more accessible to them.
Yeah, there's a specific term for that. It's called state-dependent learning,
Okay.
where you can go back to the state you're in when you did something to try to remember the thing you forgot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that a type of disassociation?
It's an encoding issue with memory.
Okay.
So it's a memory issue. I'm not sure that it would be dissociation. I'm not an expert on dissociation.
Okay.
But I'm not sure it would be classified as a memory or a dissociation issue, but it's certainly a process that happens.
Well, and dissociation is an occurrence that happens with post-traumatic stress disorder, or can.
And yes,
And it's, to some degree, it's a defense mechanism.
yes,
When a person is confronted with trauma at that point in time that they're just not capable of dealing with.
yeah, it works in 2 directions. It can be an adaptive escape, or it can be you dissociate to a bad place.
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes it's beneficial, and then sometimes it can be to where we get to it's a disorder. I mean,
Well, you can think you're back in the war zone, for
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
and kind of like the same thing. That trauma can be stored. That memory of that trauma can be stored in a place, and then certain things can trigger it.
Yes.
Smells.
Yes.
Times. If
Yeah.
if it, something happened like around a certain holiday, I could get closer to that holiday, and I could start experience the stress of the trauma. And sometimes people don't even realize why they're experiencing that.
Yes.
That's oftentimes why, veterans or other people who have experienced that type of trauma get into therapy and everything like that to try to figure out why am I behaving, this way around these certain types of, for lack of a better word, trigger.
Yes.
And something that was beneficial allowed them to get through a traumatic, experience. Then when they're taken out of that kind of that traumatic experience, it impacts like a day-to-day functioning.
Correct.
Their brain kind of reacted rationally to an irrational situation.
Sure.
And then when they're in rational situations, sometimes their brains act irrationally.
Yes.
And again, that's something that oftentimes people have been through traumatic, one traumatic event can cause post-traumatic stress disorder.
One traumatic event can cause post-traumatic stress disorder, but most don't.
And what's the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder?
Complex I'm going to say PTSD.
Okay.
Complex PTSD typically refers to repeated trauma, more than just one single incident.
Okay. And I mean, in a hypothetical example of a woman, a grown adult woman, who is sexually assaulted by a stranger, that can cause PTSD.
It can.
It can. Now, and let's get this straight. And I think the jury may have some questions. Trauma affects people differently, correct?
Yes.
Some people, and we don't know why, there's a lot of different theories. Some are genetic. Why trauma affects people differently. You can't, I know it's easier because we're having a conversation in your head, but you have to say yes because she's taking it down.
I wasn't sure you were asking me a question,
Okay.
so I'm just like gesturing, but
Yeah.
if you need a response, yes.
Yeah. So one of the factors that can impact how somebody deals with stress can be genetics.
I believe, well, neurobiology, I'm not sure
Yeah.
that it's passed down from generation to generation.
Okay. Also can be upbringing can impact how somebody can handle trauma, correct?
Yes.
If there are other kind of anchors, people or places in their lives that can help somebody handle trauma.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if somebody, for example, a woman is sexually assaulted, but she has, a strong community, she has a strong family around her, she has support, other, support groups and everything like that, that can help her deal with trauma better than somebody who is isolated and alone.
Yeah, I mean, some people are just more predisposed to having trauma,
Okay.
but most people who are exposed to traumatic events don't get PTSD.
Yes. And when we're talking about dissociative identity disorder, most of the literature indicates that that is a response to overwhelmingly child sexual trauma.
Yes.
And the basis kind of for that, or in the literature and the thinking of how this develops, is you have a child who is perped on by a caregiver, is the kind of classic example of it.
I don't know that I have looked into the literature to that degree. Childhood sexual abuse is certainly problematic. I haven't looked at perpetrator literature.
Well, and for a child who is perpetrated on by a caregiver, creates a problem for that child.
Right.
Because you have somebody, kids are not self-sufficient, correct?
Correct.
They rely upon a caregiver to give them food, correct?
Correct.
They rely upon a caregiver to give them a shelter,
Yes.
correct? And we've learned more and more in the last 20 or 30 years, they also rely upon that caregiver for, emotional support.
Right.
And we'll get into that a little bit, attachment theory and so forth, but that's actually a need of, young children, is emotional support from a caregiver.
Yes.
And so a child who is perpetrated on, who is molested by a caregiver, the point behind, or the theory behind DID, is they disassociate. And so the memories of the perpetration and the molestation go into one place. And then there's another personality or ego state that doesn't have that memory. And so can look to that caregiver for the food, shelter, and emotional support. Are you aware of that? That's the theory behind DID.
I'm aware of that theory, yes.
Okay. And therefore, it's basically a defense mechanism that would allow a child to survive and to be able to function in a horrible situation.
Yes, dissociation would be an adaptive function.
An adaptive function of that thing. And the literature, especially, when you're talking about, sex assaults in general, it's generally thought of that it is more traumatic for an individual who is aggrieved, or who is molested, who is sexually assaulted by a family member or something like that. That is generally considered more traumatic than by a stranger.
Someone in a position of trust, yes.
That causes, can cause long-term mental health issues.
It can, yes.
And just to be clear, not every kid who is sexually assaulted or perped on by an adult develops a serious mental illness.
Right.
Some of them are able, for whatever reasons, to adapt and overcome and lead a relatively normal life, correct?
Yes.
While others can, based upon the trauma suffered as a child, develop serious mental illnesses.
Yes.
And when we're talking about, disassociation and kind of alter ego states, more and more we are understanding that everything is a continuum.
I mean, mental illness.
All mental illness, and all, you think you said before, everybody disassociates to a degree, and then it becomes a problem where it becomes a mental illness, which is interfering with day-to-day life.
Right.
And the same is kind of, everybody to a degree has some different either ego states or personas that they put on.
That's very common, yes.
Very well, when I walk in here, I got my tie on, I'm going to talk professionally, I'm going to try to act smart. That may be a very different persona than I act with my kids.
Sure.
And it's not something that, especially once you've done it a bunch of times, you even have to think about it. I don't have to be up here thinking, be lawyer persona. I walk in, I've got my tie, everybody's looking, I slide into that role.
Right, that's a conscious process.
A conscious process, yeah. Right. And when you get what dissociative identity disorder is, to some degree, somebody who doesn't have control of sliding in between the different roles, they lack, I don't want to say capacity, but they lack control over that. They can slip in and out of the different personas without the ability to necessarily control that.
Well, it would be an unconscious choice.
An unconscious choice, yes. And they also lack the thought, at least in the DSM and a lot of literature, is they lack the ability to access some of the memories that the other persona has.
I think there's some variation with that, but yes, that can happen.
The one persona is keeping all the bad memories to itself, and so the other persona can function in real life.
In theory, yes.
In theory, there's literature in it. The DSM-5, that's what the DSM-5 indicates.
Sure.
Okay. And again, it only becomes a disorder when what was a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism begins impacting day-to-day life. That's when it goes into the disorder.
When it causes functional impairment, yes.
Functional impairment. It causes something like a person's not able to hold down a job for a long period of time.
Yes.
It causes problems when they have inability to have a long-term relationship with people.
Yes.
When it causes them to have problems with family members and so forth.
Sure.
And I wasn't the one, and just so that the jury understands, we're not Miss Stauch's first set of attorneys. You understand that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, eventually you were requested by a woman by the name of Katie Strobel.
Yeah, the public defender's office.
Yeah. And did they provide you any type of work history of Miss Stauch?
I had some data. I think just specifically there was some letters from Dr. Niederhauser referencing work.
And we'll get to those later. Okay. But just, generally life history, whether or not she's had trouble maintaining a job, whether or not she's constantly been changing jobs, that type of stuff.
I don't think they provided me that.
Okay. And that might be something that you talked about might be relevant towards either dissociative disorder or borderline personality disorder. Is somebody who constantly cannot hold down a job, that can be symptomatic of either one of those diagnoses, or can be evidence of it, not in and of itself, but circumstantial evidence.
Well, and many other things. So that's an important thing to ask about. Yes.
Absolutely. Is what type of mental illnesses are comorbid with dissociative identity disorder?
So comorbid means that they're happening at the same time.
I just wanted to seem smart.
Yes, you did.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Dissociative identity disorder, PTSD, borderline, bipolar, well, sometimes it's confused with bipolar disorder. I don't think it's comorbid with it. Anxiety disorders.
Okay, and you are aware that Ms. Stauch had been diagnosed with a general anxiety disorder?
I am aware she reported that.
Okay, well, I mean, you're aware that the jail was actually prescribing her medication for anxiety?
Yes.
Well, and you're aware from a letter from Dr. Niederheiser that she was suffering from anxiety and stress?
Yes.
And that was a letter that was dated a couple months before the events in question?
Yes.
Another possible indication of dissociative identity disorder is self-injury?
Not just DID, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, that I'm just like something that the DSM-5 lists as something that occurs in a generally you can see can be evidence of DID, and that would be self-injury is one of the things that DSM-5 indicates.
I'm actually not aware of that.
Suicide attempts.
I don't have the DSM-5 memorized, as I'm sure you can appreciate.
Absolutely.
I don't know the full extent of the criteria. I obviously reviewed them as part of my evaluation, but I haven't memorized them, and I don't want to say yes or no to symptoms that I'm not clear on.
If I may approach,
You may.
okay, I'm on page 294. And if you could look at the associated features supporting the diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder.
Thank you.
Okay, and so self-injury, anxiety, all those things can be associated with dissociative identity disorder.
Yes.
May I approach? Great, thank you. You're also aware that the DSM-5 indicates only a small percentage of people with DID present in a manner that somebody would see the shifts in personas.
Yes.
And so, asking individuals who maybe have talked with Ms. Stauch for an hour or so who don't know her, if they've noticed changes in her personality, would not necessarily be that relevant in determining whether or not she has dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah, that wouldn't be very reliable.
Yeah, I mean, it would be kind of misleading to indicate that somebody with dissociative identity disorder is going to be changing personas multiple times in a 1 hour conversation.
Yes.
That's not consistent with any literature whatsoever.
Correct.
And also, with dissociative identity disorder, impairment varies widely from apparently minimal to profound.
Yes.
And that's in the DSM-5. And so somebody, you just said, but on direct, you're saying you would expect to have all like these problems with dissociative identity disorder. But the DSM-5 seems to indicate that it can be minimal disruptions or profound disruptions depending upon the individual.
So I was referencing my competency evaluation.
Okay.
So
Yes.
if somebody's experiencing mild symptoms of anything, it's not going to be something that presents as a barrier. So I'm looking for symptoms to a degree that they're causing functional impairment. So I'm offering testimony specific for the purpose of my evaluation.
Okay. And many mental illnesses, or almost all mental illnesses, they fluctuate.
Yes.
And that's why when you're talking about competency, you're doing competency at that specific time.
Yes.
Because it's not static.
It's not.
It can vary.
Yes.
And almost, even a mental illness such as schizophrenia can vary. Sometimes people can be in active psychosis, but you could have someone who has schizophrenia and a month later, they may look apparently normal.
Yeah, we talk about symptoms waxing and waning.
And I've had experience with clients who have grown up in very traumatic, chaotic environments that are actually much more comfortable in jail or prison environments. And have you seen that same type of thing?
Yeah, people get institutionalized and they
Well-
need that structure. And sure, ask your question.
Okay, let me for example, like somebody who, again, one caregiver may be abusive. They sometimes may not have food. They may not know what's going to go on for day to day. Jail or prison is very structured. You eat at this time, you do this at this time, everything like that. Sometimes people from traumatic environments can actually be much less stressed in jail and much more adaptive in jail.
Some people, yes.
And so the degree, sorry, it's thirsty, as to the structure of the jail was impacting the presentation of mental illness, we don't necessarily know.
I wouldn't know in the course of a competency evaluation.
A lot of times people with dissociative identity disorder will try to conceal that's going on from other people around them.
I haven't worked, to my knowledge, directly with people with DID, so I can't answer that.
Are you aware that the literature reflects that generally people are in mental health treatment between 4 to 6 years before they're correctly diagnosed with DID?
Yes, I believe it can take a long time.
Are you aware that the DSM-5 indicates one of the things that leads a lot of individuals with DID to therapy initially is OCD?
I think I remember reading that.
Okay, and what is OCD?
Obsessive compulsive disorder.
What does that mean?
You have thoughts that are very disturbing to you that drive you to engage in a behavior to alleviate the distress of having the thought, like hand washing, germs, stuff,
It's a coping mechanism.
to alleviate mental distress.
Okay. Can it be a coping mechanism to alleviate the mental stress of childhood trauma?
There's no straight line to get to OCD, so
Okay. It can vary, but that's a realistic hypothetical.
sure.
The DSM-5, the DSM-5 is helping figure out what's wrong with the person and give them a label, correct?
Right.
And the reason for that is, and again, I think Ms. Young has brought this up, is not necessarily designed for the forensic setting. It's designed more for the clinical setting, that we give somebody a label, and then based on that label, this is kind of the course of treatment.
Right. It's very much specifically for clinical treatment, and it provides a common language for providers to be able to talk about, diagnose, and come up with plans for patients.
But it is still relied upon to a large extent, even in a forensic setting.
Well, there's a forensic caution
Sure.
in there, but yes, it's the only diagnostic manual we have.
That's the only thing that we don't have anything else, so we have to use it, even though it's not necessarily specifically designed for it.
Correct.
And it has what's called, when it lists differential diagnoses, what is that?
A differential diagnosis is if, let's say, DID is the primary diagnosis you're looking at, a differential diagnosis would be other things to consider that it could be instead.
Okay. And one of the things that it lists, it lists personality disorder, and it lists specifically borderline personality disorder.
Yes.
And it specifically states that oftentimes borderline personality disorder can present similarly to DID.
Yes.
And you diagnosed Ms. Stauch with a personality disorder with borderline and narcissistic features.
Yes.
And when we're talking personality disorders, those are kind of organized by clusters.
Yes.
And narcissistic and borderline, I think they're in the B cluster.
Yes.
And when we do clusters, that means we're organizing personality disorders that have some similarities.
Yes.
And that's how, when did we start doing the clusters?
Before my time.
So the DSM-3?
It was definitely the DSM-4TR, which is my time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it wasn't in the previous
Okay.
sections.
And we'll have other personality disorders that could be, there's cluster A and there's cluster C that are kind of different than cluster B.
Right. And we no longer have clusters in the DSM-5TR.
We don't?
I don't think so. It's more of a dimensional continuum.
You sure?
I'm not for sure.
Okay.
I
If the
thought
DSM-5
that was
seems,
clusters.
okay. The DSM-5 still indicates cluster B. Would that be,
If it indicates it, then it's correct.
if I may approach? You may. 659.
Well, look at you looking smart again. Yes, you're correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so cluster B, we've got antisocial, histrionic, borderline, narcissistic.
Yes.
What is antisocial personality disorder?
Antisocial personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of breaking the law, having difficulty adapting to authority and social norms, deception, lying, general rule-breaking behavior.
And Ms. Stauch has had multiple evaluations. Is that 2 competency and 2 sanity?
I'm not
You're not-
familiar with what happened after I met
Okay.
her,
Are you aware of anybody ever diagnosing her with antisocial personality disorder?
not to my knowledge.
What's a psychopath?
Psychopath is not a diagnosis.
Okay.
It is a person who manifests a lot of antisocial traits, lack of empathy, callousness, kind of parasitic behavior, living off of other people. There's a specific criteria that need to be met to be diagnosed as a psychopath, be assigned a label, but it's not a clinical diagnosis. It's not in the DSM,
Nobody has ever diagnosed her or given her the label of a psychopath to your knowledge.
to my knowledge.
Talk a little bit about borderline personality.
That is strange how she was not ever diagnosed as being a psychopath. I thought that was very strange. You know, very impulsive. They very impulsive people. You know, she doesn't have no remorse, no empathy. She just, doesn't care. But, like I said, it's all about who's diagnosing you. Because she has something. She's definitely serving the devil. Okay? But she got something. There's something seriously wrong with her. My thoughts and opinions, but I'm surprised psychopath wasn't on the list. All right. Reason.
Disorder. What is borderline personality disorder?
Borderline personality disorder is a disorder of interpersonal relationships where the person has a profound fear of abandonment, chronic feelings of emptiness, tendency to engage in self-destructive behavior, whether it's sex, gambling, self-injury, suicidal gestures, and possible transient episodes of psychosis.
Okay. And similarly, both the underlying literature seems to indicate that both DID and borderline personality disorder are generally caused by childhood trauma.
I believe that for borderline personality disorder, it's not necessary or sufficient to have had childhood trauma.
No, but the thought of it is that childhood trauma can cause borderline personality disorder.
It can certainly lead to it, but it's not required.
It's not, yes. So DID, it's almost exclusively
Trauma-based.
childhood trauma. I mean, most of the literature has anywhere between 94 to 100% of people with DID suffer significant childhood trauma, and it's almost always sexual childhood trauma, correct?
Probably.
Okay. And borderline personality disorder, there's a correlation, but not necessarily a direct cause.
Yes.
And a high degree of people with borderline personality disorder reflect childhood trauma.
Yes.
And some of this, at least my understanding, are you familiar with attachment theory?
I mean, I've had it as part of my training.
Okay. And it's Bowlby? I'm mispronouncing that.
Bowlby.
Bowlby. And what is attachment theory?
Well, Bowlby, this is going back to the 60s, I think, before
Yeah.
my time. there was research done on the damage of separating mother and infant. There's a critical period between the age of 0 and 2 where attachment with the caregiver forms. If those attachments are disrupted, it can affect the child's functioning going forward.
And basically, they took, it was him and then a Mary Ainsworth. They took, I think it was 1 or 2 year olds, children in between that age. They put them in a room and then they had the caregiver leave.
Ainsworth did, yes.
Yeah, Ainsworth did. And
Ainsworth? Thank you.
And based upon that, and then the caregiver, Mary Ainsworth, the caregiver would be gone, I think 10, 15 minutes, and then the caregiver would re-enter the room.
Yes.
And what they were basically able to notice is 3 different phenomena with the different children.
Yes.
One phenomena, which they would then label secure attachment, which is what as parents we hope to be able to do with our children, is the child would be distressed, and then the caregiver would return to the room, and the child would be soothed.
I believe with secure attachment, the child was able to self-soothe before the caregiver returned.
Are you
They
sure?
were comforted by the caregiver returning.
Would that be avoidant attachment with the child that doesn't seem to care whether the parent comes or goes?
Well, I think they were still distressed, if I remember correctly. They just weren't comforted by the caregiver.
Oh.
This has been a long time.
Okay.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Absolutely.
Amy, if you could find a reasonable breaking point. This is a good breaking point, Your Honor. This is good. Sure. I didn't want to interrupt.
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take our morning recess. If I can have everyone back in the jury room at say 10:40, we should be able to start on time at that point. Again, don't discuss the case among yourselves. Don't discuss the case with anyone else. Don't do your own research about any aspect of the case. With that, we'll see you back at 10:40. All right, from the jury first. All rise for the jury, please. Thank you. You may all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record to reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. When we took our break, we were in the midst of the cross-examination of Dr. Grimmett. That's where we will resume. Mr. Tellini.
Yes, Dr. Grimmett. And back, we were kind of talking about attachment theory, and I'll kind of move on from the exact experiment, but what from the experiment, they basically developed 3 different styles of attachment, secure, avoidant, and anxious. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
And secure attachment, the theory is that comes when a child grows up and they are given the appropriate attention by the parent. The child cries and the parent comes in to soothe them. The child is hungry and the parent comes in to feed them, correct?
Yeah, the child perceives their needs are met.
And the theory behind attachment theory is that then children who grow up securely attached are then able to have secure relationships. They can have a romantic partner. They can explode, romantic relationships or other relationships that actually work and are functional.
It sets a good foundation for that.
Yes. The theory with avoidant attachment, people with that, maybe had a caregiver who was not attentive. The child would cry and nobody would come to soothe it. The child would be hungry, nobody would feed it. And they kind of grow to put on a persona that they don't need anybody and are very kind of self-reliant and feel threatened by intimate relationships and so forth. That would be kind of the characteristics of avoidant.
It could be, yes.
And then we have anxious, and that's somebody who, similar to the avoidant, did not have their needs met by the caregiver, and they can be extremely needy in a relationship. They put a lot of, kind of same with, that's why I was getting to it. Anxious attachment would be similar to borderline personality disorder.
I think that it stems from an unpredictability and inconsistency with parenting where the child doesn't know what's coming, whether they're going to get soothed or not. There's some inconsistency there that causes some distress.
And kind of back talking with borderline, that's with the romantic relationships, they're consumed with it at the beginning and then think that it's going to be taken away and are very threatened by the fear of abandonment.
Yes.
And then later on, they actually came up with disorganized attachment.
Yes.
And disorganized attachment is kind of the anxious, but on steroids. And that's generally thought to somebody who was traumatized by a caregiver.
I'm not too familiar with that.
Okay. Have you ever heard the term disorganized attachment style?
Yes, I could tell you what the criteria
Okay.
are.
But, so the same, theory of the causes, at least back to anxious, there's some tracking and some similarities between the anxious attachment theory and borderline personality disorder.
Yes.
And you were, as part of the discovery that you reviewed, were you given hours upon hours upon hours of phone conversations between Al Stauch and Letecia Stauch that were recorded by the FBI?
Not hours and hours, no. I did listen to some pretext phone calls, but I don't recall them being hours.
Okay, you're lucky. Somebody who, in the face of a missing child or a homicide investigation, who is incredibly preoccupied with the relationship status and whether or not Al Stauch is going to take her back, that would be extremely consistent with borderline personality disorder.
Yes. Yes.
So it's
That is definitely borderline personality disorder. That's when I was listening to those recordings with him, and And then I think she even said a statement like, "I'll only speak when you come around me. I want to hold you, I want to hold you. I want to be around you. I can be around you." Sex and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, this girl got borderline personality disorder. Yep, she definitely got it. And you know who else have it too? Well, you know, they even said too, she was, I guess, diagnosed with it. Anybody was watching the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial? Oh, yes, Amber Heard has it too, full blown. All right, resume.
It appears like this is just irrational to focus on this.
It's an irrational focus. I would say it's consistent with borderline personality disorder, but also be consistent with other things.
Sure, it could be consistent with narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
And the DSM-5 itself, it has a ton of different categories of mental illnesses or symptoms of so forth, correct? There's a lot of different diagnoses in the DSM-5.
Oh, yes.
The DSM-5 itself doesn't, at least now the DSM-5 especially, does not categorize one thing as a serious mental illness versus something else. Like it doesn't say, the DSM-5 is, I catch you. The DSM-5 doesn't say schizophrenia is a serious mental illness, but borderline personality disorder is not.
That's right.
It just says these are the things we look for these diagnoses.
Right.
And all the diagnoses can exist on a continuum.
Yes.
Somebody could have a very, let's say mild, but, well, bipolar disorder can be a serious mental illness, correct?
I mean, it typically is a serious mental illness.
But somebody could have bipolar disorder to a degree that it does not substantially impact their life. And then, so according to the definition of the National Institute of Mental Health, would not be a serious mental illness.
There are mental illnesses in the field that are considered serious because of how impactful they are. And bipolar disorder would be one of those. You don't tend to have a mild case of bipolar disorder, certainly can, but it's typically a disabling disorder.
It typically, but it could not be.
It could not be.
Okay. And that's why I'm saying, that's why the DSM doesn't necessarily label it, because you could also have on the continuum, a severe case of a personality disorder that can impact the day-to-day functioning of that person's life.
Right.
And if it and according to the National Institute of Mental Health, if the mental illness is impacting that person's day-to-day life, then it is categorized as a mental illness.
I don't concern myself with what the National Institute of Mental Health says for competency evaluation.
Sure.
So I can't really answer that.
Do you know that that's what the definition by the National Institute of Mental Health is for serious mental illness?
No, not particularly. I work off of the DSM, and because
Okay.
I'm not providing treatment,
Sure.
it's not relevant for
Okay.
me day to day.
Would you agree with that definition? Is a serious mental illness is a mental illness that impacts somebody's day-to-day life?
I don't know what the formal definition is, but if I'm assessing someone,
No.
I'm looking for the level of impairment in day-to-day life.
Okay. And sometimes personality disorders can be so severe that they impact a person's day-to-day life.
Yes.
Now, I also I emailed you some articles.
You did?
One of those articles I'm going to be approaching with Defense Exhibit C is hallucinations and other psychotic symptoms in patients with borderline personality disorder.
Yes.
Let me approach. Okay. Take a look at that and see if that looks familiar.
Yes.
And just so everybody understands, you said one of the things that you do when you're confronted with, a patient or something new is you do research in your line of profession.
Yes.
And because no psychologist or psychiatrist has had specific hands-on experience with every type of mental illness, there's new things that come up, correct?
Correct.
And you do research, and where do you turn for research?
To peer-reviewed journals.
Peer-reviewed journals. And basically what that is, there are, both sometimes practicing clinicians, and there's other people in academia, and they will do studies and so forth and submit articles to peer-reviewed journals.
Yes.
And then those peer-reviewed journals there's lots of different ones in psychiatry, evidently, or psychology. And you will look at it and look to those peer-reviewed journals to inform you on certain situations.
Yes.
The article, which I have given you, that comes from a peer-reviewed journal, correct?
Yes.
And it is something that would be, I'm not asking if you agree with everything in it or not, but that would be something that would be generally relied upon people in your field.
It would be considered.
Considered.
Yes.
Yes. That article indicates that they've done studies and people with borderline personality disorder can suffer psychotic symptoms.
Yes.
And I want to step back here for a second. Let's talk about psychotic symptoms. And Dr. Grimmett, if I'm incorrect on any of this, let me know. My understanding is there are psychotic symptoms, and psychotic isn't necessarily a diagnosis itself, but there are certain symptoms that we look at to make other diagnoses in the DSM-5. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
And when we're talking about psychotic symptoms, we're talking about a couple different things. We're talking about delusions.
Yes.
And delusions are a fixed belief that is not amenable to change by evidence.
Yes.
And so I have this belief, and no matter what you show me, what you do, I'm not changing this belief that I have.
Correct.
And, the general delusions that everybody's are, familiar with, we have delusions of grandeur, one type of delusion, grandiose delusions.
Are you asking me a question? Yes.
Another type of delusions would be paranoid delusions.
Yes.
And delusions can, again, they can be on a continuum.
Yes.
A delusion of grandeur. I mean, hypothetically, if we have the NFL draft coming up this weekend, are you aware of that?
I'm not.
Probably
aware of
not.
that.
But, say somebody who hardly ever played for his college team believes that he's going to be drafted despite everybody saying there's no way this is possible. That could be delusional.
Yeah.
And that would be on the low end of the spectrum.
I'm not sure it would be considered pathological, but
Pathological, but it's a fixed belief that,
delusions of grandeur are more typically thinking you hold some high status like you're Jesus.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Then on the other hand is the Masonic, I'm coming here, I've been blessed to save the world, I have this specific mission, I have super smarter than everybody else, that type of thing.
Right.
Paranoid delusions, the government's after me, they're putting stuff in my head. That would be an example of a paranoid delusion.
Yes.
So that is one symptom of psychosis.
Yes.
Another symptom of psychosis would be hallucinations.
Yes.
And hallucinations could be auditory.
Yes.
And auditory hallucinations, I'm hearing voices, I'm hearing anything that is not really there.
Right.
We have visual hallucinations,
We do.
which is I'm seeing things that aren't there.
Right.
And sometimes I'm seeing things that aren't there and they're talking to me, and that would be an auditory and a visual hallucination at the same time.
That's right.
We can also have tactile delusions.
Oh, yes. I forgot to add, yes, she did have histrionic. I definitely seen that in her. Histrionic and borderline personality disorder. Ooh, my grandma was definitely a histrionic. Lord have mercy. Narcissist, too. Resume.
And what is that?
Feeling something on your body that's not there.
Okay. We also have, then the next thing would be disorganized thought or disorganized.
You don't want to cover the rest of the hallucinations?
I can. What else do we have? I thought I have the main one.
Well, there's a couple more that you should know about.
Oh, tell me.
There's olfactory hallucinations where you smell things that aren't actually there.
Okay.
And there's gustatory hallucinations where you taste things that aren't there.
Okay. All right.
Want to make sure we have all the information.
Absolutely. Thank you. We also have disorganized thought. And what is that?
Not being able to follow your own line of thinking, not making sense in your thoughts and how they come out your mouth.
And that can also be on a continuum, correct?
Yes.
I mean, it can go anywhere from kind of tangential thinking all the way to what's called word salad.
Yes.
And what is word salad?
When the words that come out your mouth are not logically connected to each word, so it sounds like you're just saying words and it's not a sentence.
And tangential thinking is where somebody is jumping from one thing to another without anything necessarily connecting them.
Correct.
And then we kind of have the other ones. We have abnormal motor behavior. And what is that?
Well, that can be lots of things. It might be like a stereotypic shape.
Lovejoy, Dr. Curry tore that up. Oh, I definitely focus on that one. Ooh, she did a phenomenal job. Resume.
Shaking, it might be picking, pilling, or having underactive movements where you don't respond.
And then finally, we have the negative symptoms. And what are those?
So the hallucinations and delusions are considered positive symptoms. That means there's a symptom present when you wouldn't expect there to be something. A negative symptom is when you expect to see something that's not there. So that would be underactive motor, flat affect, no change in emotional expression, a lack of energy, lack of interest, lack of engagement, apathy, those kind of things.
Sometimes people who are psychotic can just sit in a room and stare into nothing for hours upon hours at a time.
Yes.
And we use these to make, diagnoses. I mean, generally what we think about psychotic symptoms, the main diagnosis we have is schizophrenia.
We have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder with psychotic features, major depression with psychotic features are typical. Bipolar disorder and major depressive disorder with psychotic features are the typical ones.
And there are certain criteria for somebody with psychotic symptoms for schizophrenia. I think it has to be, you have to experience psychotic symptoms for about a month, and then it has to be persistent for over 6 months, correct?
You have to have symptoms for over 6 months. You have to have hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking or the negative.
You have to have multiple symptoms of psychosis, right, not just one. But there are lots of other mental illnesses that can cause transient psychotic features, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, sometimes PTSD can cause transient psychotic features.
Uncommonly, but yes.
Okay. Dissociative identity disorder can cause transient psychotic features.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. And that article indicates that people with borderline personality disorder can suffer from transient psychotic features.
Yeah, and that's one of the criteria in the DSM-5.
Yeah. And it indicates that between 20 to 50% of people that suffer from borderline personality disorder suffer from hallucinations.
In the sample.
Yes. That these hallucinations can be both auditory and visual, sorry.
Yeah.
Sometimes that 50% of the hallucinations had malicious content.
Right. So this was a sample of 143 people, just because you don't have the article.
I know. And Mr. Young's, after I'm done, he's going to come up and you guys are going to discuss why he thinks this article is garbage. But I'm just going.
If I may, at this point, I'm going to object to this line of testimony as to irrelevant. There's nothing tying this to what she did in this case, and certainly nothing tying this to the defendant. So,
Well, first of all, the jury will disregard counsel's statement regarding what Mr. Young may or may not do. As you know, counsel can't testify in this case. Nothing that they say is evidence. Secondly, you qualified this witness as a witness in forensic psychiatry.
Psychology.
Or psychology, that's right, I'm sorry. Forensic psychology. This witness has not said it's outside her expertise, so it's within her expertise. And there were some questions regarding the presence or absence of dissociative identity disorder. So I will allow the questioning overruled.
And according to this study, 50% of the hallucinations are malicious content.
I don't recall specifically, but yes. Can you direct me to where on the,
If you could look on the second sentence of page 790,
thank you, yes,
50% of the hallucinations had malicious content.
Yes.
And so that would mean 50% of the hallucinations seem threatening to the person perceiving them.
yes.
And I think I gave you a couple other articles from other peer-reviewed journals that indicate that people with borderline personality can suffer from audio and visual hallucinations.
Yes.
Are you aware of any studies disputing the fact that people with borderline personality disorder can suffer from auditory and visual hallucinations?
No, it's part of the criteria for the disorder.
Okay. And also people with borderline personality disorder can disassociate.
Not just from borderline personality disorder, but they may have other conditions going on that cause dissociation.
Who just creeped through the back door? Cash App. And blessings to you and good evening. Hey, y'all. Which day is this? This is today. So it's actually day 15 of the trial. So it's today. I'm just only showing the first part of the psychologist. And tomorrow I might do the other half of day 15 because they're not in court on Thursday. But I just want to focus on this one today. And good to see you. Resume.
Okay. According to this article that we are talking about, the hallucinations, there's kind of three different things that they look about that bring upon the hallucinations. The first one that they talk about is stress.
Yes.
And that periods of stress can cause somebody who has this personality disorder to slip into a psychotic state.
Right. And that's not specific to the article. Again, the episodes is stress related.
Okay. You were provided a letter from December, I believe, 13th from a Dr. Niederhauser.
Yes.
Indicating that she was seeing Ms. Stauch.
Yes.
And indicating that Ms. Stauch needed to resign from her work because she was suffering from stress and anxiety.
Yes.
Another thing, according to this article, that can impact the degree somebody with borderline personality disorder suffers psychotic symptoms is whether or not they experience childhood trauma growing up.
Can you direct me to the page again?
And I'm looking at page 790. So same page that we were on. It kind of has number 2 or what factors influence psychotic symptoms in borderline personality disorder. The first one, it indicates stress. The second one, hallucinations, childhood trauma, and disassociation.
Okay.
All right, let me pause for just a second. I just want to read the poll. All right, let's read the poll. So far, we have 12 votes. And it says, and I put down, why do you think Harley didn't want to talk to the psychologist? And that's 12 votes. So 67% says Donna, she had something to hide. 25% says, not sure. And 8% said, she is young Donna. All right, reason.
I just feel like we addressed this when we were talking about the underlying factors for
Sure.
borderline personality disorder. So I didn't perceive anything in this article to be different than what we've already discussed. That's why I feel a bit confused.
Okay. No, but when we were discussing whether or not childhood trauma causes borderline personality disorder or whether or not it's a correlation, and I think you pointed out, some people can have borderline personality disorder, but not necessarily have childhood trauma.
Right.
And this seems to indicate that people who have both childhood trauma and borderline personality disorder, those people seem to suffer psychotic symptoms more than people who have borderline personality disorder without childhood trauma.
It's just very difficult to work through because most people don't experience just one
Sure.
issue. So if they have borderline personality disorder, they usually have accompanying other dysfunction, whether it's another mental illness or other personality disorders. So trying to narrow it down to say this causes this, there could be a number of reasons why somebody's manifesting symptoms, and me and my role would not be able to say this is coming from that.
Sure. And I wasn't asking that. I'm just saying that that's what this article seems to indicate, correct? And it also says that it can be impacted by whether or not a person feels lonely.
Yes.
It also indicates that people with borderline personality disorder can feel stress more acutely than other people. And I think that would be, I mean, that's pretty much accepted. Would you agree?
Right, they don't handle stress well.
and I think you talked about it. I mean, someone with borderline personality disorder, they send a text, and if that's not responded to correctly, I mean, they get,
Their world is ending.
yeah.
Sorry. The world is ending.
Okay. All right. So let's now, and actually, Your Honor, at this point in time, I would move for admission of defense exhibit C under 803-18 learning treatise.
Prosecution,
May I board R?
you may.
Defense Exhibit C that you have there in front of you, did you use that in any way, shape, or form in formulating the opinions that you gave to the jury today?
No, I was only provided this last week or the week before.
Does it have any impact on your testimony or your opinions that you gave to the jury today? And our objection would be based on relevance.
May I see exhibit C first?
Yes. Let me approve.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Also hearsay for that matter.
That's why he's offering to admit it under 803-18. Right. Under 803-18, statements from a learned treatise may be admitted. They may be received as exhibits. I'm not going to allow this entire article to go back there, largely because it appears to have.
Feel free to rant and say whatever you want. Share it with us. When this is a teaching, learning channel. We all here to learn and respect everybody's opinions and their thoughts and opinions of what they have to say about this. But this is very interesting. Very interesting. And so sad, this baby. One thing I'd say is he's around a lot of toxic people. And I know they witness, the kids, in the house, them just arguing and arguing. That's not healthy. And it's so sad this angel is not here no more. And died in such a horrific way. Horrific. How could you do that? You have to be serving the devil. Resume.
A lot, or it requires a lot of expertise to decipher large portions of it. 803-18, however, says that if admitted, the statements may be read into evidence as the court permits. If there are certain specific statements, not the entire article, but if there are certain specific statements that you want to read into the record, you can do that.
And again, Your Honor, I'm asking it to be admitted as impeachment on Dr. Grimmett. She has diagnosed Ms. Stauch with a personality disorder with borderline features. She then indicated on direct that that was not a serious mental illness. I think this article impeaches her regarding that and how that borderline personality disorder can be a serious mental illness to the degree that it is. There are scientific terms and extra stuff in here that can be difficult for a lay witness to discern. I would say that goes to weight, not admissibility, and I'm asking it to be admitted under those grounds.
I've made my ruling and I've given you an option. So you can either read the specific statements that you wish to have into the record. It sounds like you probably covered most of them, not in exactly the same language that's in the article, but I've given you the option and I've made the ruling.
Okay. Now we just read. Let me ask.
You need this back?
Yes.
Okay.
Why have a topic here?
Oh, all right. Okay.
Before we leave borderline personality disorder, where does the term come from?
It is considered to be on the borderline between neurosis and psychosis.
And it in the older DSM, I think under the DSM-2, it was actually listed under the schizo disorders.
That is more information than I have.
Okay.
I don't have a copy of the DSM-2.
Okay. All right. Let's go on to your evaluation of Ms. Stauch. One, well, Dr. Grimmett, you've actually done evaluations for me in the past, haven't you?
I have.
This evaluation that you did here seemed much more thorough than a typical competency evaluation. Do you agree with that?
A typical competency evaluation that doesn't have a felony one charge on it.
Sure. And generally on a typical competency evaluation, I mean, is this what percentage of competency evaluations do you go through and listen to jail phone calls?
Whenever they're made available to me.
Okay. And is that usual or is that unusual to read jail phone calls?
It's fairly unusual.
Okay. And who provided you the jail phone calls?
The district attorney's office.
Okay. And they actually helped and assisted you in playing them, correct?
Oh yeah, they're always recorded in a format that's very difficult to decipher.
It is. When you initially started talking with Ms. Stauch, she expressed some frustration with her attorneys.
Yes.
She was very frustrated because her attorneys would not come to visit her at the jail.
Yes.
And for context, this was during COVID,
It was.
and COVID changed a lot of the ways that we do stuff.
Yes.
In-person visits became the rarity, and a lot of stuff was done over WebEx or so forth.
Yes.
You did this one though in person, correct?
Yes.
Where in the jail did you do it?
In the no contact booth. I don't remember if it was Alpha or I don't know, but it
Did
was.
it have it like the trap open or was the trap closed?
I documented.
Great point. Lovejoy. Great point. I love that show. Oh my gosh, I love it. Love it. Reason.
It was a no contact booth. I don't recall talking to her on the phone.
Okay.
So I'm imagining it must have had a trap.
Okay. And just so that the jury's, aware, this is where you go, it's like you see on TV, the person comes in, there's a big, it's not glass, it's some type of clear plastic in between you and them. And then there's like a little trap door that opens and
Yes.
shuts, and the communication is done through there.
Yes.
She was also in shackles,
She was.
and that kind of prevented you from doing some types of testing, correct?
Yes.
Specifically, I mean, there was some further testing that could have been done, regarding malingering and so forth, but that is somewhat prohibited by the nature of the examination.
Yes.
Objectively, I understand your position. She was malingering some symptoms to try to seem more mentally ill than she was. Objectively, though, she indicated to you that she did not want to be found crazy.
First of all, I never said she was malingering.
Okay.
I had concerns about feigning, but I did not use the vocabulary of malingering. So I just want to be clear.
What's the difference between feigning and malingering?
Feigning is intentional exaggeration or production of symptoms. Malingering takes it to the next level, assuming what the secondary gain may be.
Okay. And just to be clear, somebody can have a serious mental illness and feign symptoms.
Yes.
They're not exclusive.
I outlined that in my
Yeah.
conclusion. Yes.
I mean, and it's not necessarily even that uncommon.
Not in forensic settings.
Not in forensic setting. So a lot of times you can have somebody who has a mental illness, but they will try to exaggerate those symptoms in hopes that you will come with a diagnosis that is helpful for them.
Or they're so mentally ill that they don't understand how they present and they think they have to act worse. Otherwise, I might miss it.
Okay. And to be fair, that makes the job of a forensic psychologist more difficult.
Difficult and interesting.
To figure out where the mental illness ends and where the feigning begins can be tricky.
Right.
She did indicate to you, though, very clearly that she did not want to be found crazy.
Yes.
And then you actually even heard her on some jail phone calls with her daughter, Harley, indicating that she passed the first test, the first competency exam with flying colors, and she was going to pass her with flying colors.
Yes.
So she would have known that she was found competent, and so she viewed that as passing, and she was going to pass your exam as well.
Well, I recall that she had said, I don't recall whether it was to Harley or someone else, that she wasn't intending on passing as well or doing as well in the second time
Yeah.
that she did on the first.
But there's at least one phone call to Harley that she passed the first one with flying colors, and she was going to pass yours with flying colors. You kind of got a history from her.
Yes.
She indicated she grew up in North Carolina.
One of the Carolinas? Yes,
Yes.
I think so.
And do you have your report up there?
I do.
And if it's okay with Mr. Young, I don't have a problem if anytime you need to refer to your report to refresh your recollection to do so. If you could just let us know that you're referring to it.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
I have no problem.
Okay. So she grew up in North Carolina?
Yes.
She was raised by both her mother and father until they divorced when she was 2.
Yes.
She indicated that she didn't really have any contact with her father after that until she was much older.
17, I believe.
She indicated being raised a lot by her grandfather,
Yes.
who was very religious.
Yes.
And would alternate between kind of a good guy, bad guy thing. Kind of sometimes nurturing, sometimes harsh authoritarian.
I didn't go into what she meant by that.
She did indicate that she was molested by her stepfather.
Yes.
How much detail did you get into that?
None.
None. And that she was also angry at her mother because her mother didn't protect her from the molestation.
Yes.
That the mother had chosen the stepfather over her.
She just, what I wrote in my report is what she told me, that
Okay.
she hadn't forgiven her.
When people or perpetrators molest children or stepkids in that environment, one of the keys to it is secrecy.
That can be an element, yes.
That's generally isn't the element that whoever is molesting a stepchild will do things in order to try to keep it secret within the family.
I don't work with perpetrators,
Okay.
so I just don't have a knowledge base for that.
Then I will move on to my next chapter. She indicated, you talked about kind of her work and vocational history.
Yes.
She indicated to you that she primarily worked as a teacher, but she experienced some mental problems and she started having visions of her stepfather that interfered with her work.
Yes.
She also indicated numerous miscarriages
Yes.
in her history. Did that stand out or?
I mean, it was notable, but remembering that my purpose is to establish if she's competent or not,
Sure.
it wasn't important to answer that question.
Okay. She indicated that She had been hospitalized in Canada.
She said that, yes.
That she was prescribed Zyprexa at one point.
Well, I don't know if she was prescribed or offered, but she said she refused it.
At one point she agreed to, and Gideon?
Geodon.
And that's an antipsychotic.
Yes.
It's kind of an unusual antipsychotic, isn't it?
No.
No? Is that the brand name or is that the?
It's the brand name.
Okay.
It might be Palperidol. Don't quote me on it. But it's common.
Okay. And then she was also described in taking lorazepam.
She was not taking it at the time of the evaluation, but she had.
Okay. And that would be for anxiety?
She said it was for bipolar disorder, but it is a benzodiazepine,
I mean,
typically for anxiety.
lorazepam generally wouldn't be prescribed for bipolar disorder, would it?
It can have indications for bipolar disorder. I've never personally seen it prescribed for that, but when I searched it, it did say it could be used for bipolar disorder, but it's not a first line of treatment for
First line
bipolar.
I mean, generally with bipolar disorder, you'd prescribe a mood stabilizer.
I mean, prescribing is outside my scope of practice,
Sure.
but yes, I would
That
expect to
would
see
be-
that they were being prescribed a mood stabilizer.
Sorry. And well, that was actually one of the reasons why you discarded the possible diagnosis of bipolar, because she was given that coming from CMHIP to the jail, but was not given a mood stabilizer. And so that lessened the degree that was actually a diagnosis, because if it was actually bipolar disorder, CMHIP would have more than likely then also given her a mood stabilizer prescription to take to CJC.
I would have expected to see that, and that was definitely one of the factors I considered.
Okay. But there was, and not only rule out, but the CMHIP in the transfer from her to CJC in the jail records indicated that CMHIP had diagnosed her with bipolar.
So the CMHIP records indicated she had been diagnosed with bipolar, and then she underwent a review at CJC where that prescriber ruled out bipolar disorder.
Okay. So just so that I'm clear, CMHIP had said she was bipolar disorder, and then CJC and Dr. Moore said, no, she's not bipolar disorder.
It was Holly Wallerstein.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't Dr. Moore who did the review.
Okay. But somebody reviewed it and said, no, I disagree with CMHIP. She's not bipolar.
Yes.
And it's always been confusing to me when you say rule out something, because in the general terms, when you say rule out, that makes, every time I read it, I'm thinking you're saying, no, it can't be that. That's not what rule out means, correct?
With a rule out diagnosis, it explicitly means there's not enough information to say they do or they did not have it. It needs to be ruled out.
Yeah. So someone needs to do more research and everything like that to either say yes or no.
Right.
Very confusing.
Well, and you see it a lot in forensic evaluations because we have time limited
Yeah.
meetings with people. So we offer rule outs because we can't be sure.
And because it doesn't necessarily go towards competency.
Correct.
I mean, whether, kind of with whether or not she actually suffers from PTSD or not, or suffers from an anxiety disorder or not, you didn't see either one of those affecting her ability to know what's going on or ability to work with her attorneys. And so you have limited resource, limited time, don't have time to make that determination whether we have PTSD or anxiety.
Right. It's not a psychodiagnostic evaluation. So I
Yeah.
just cover what is necessary to support the opinion.
A lot of some things that you considered in your evaluation were jail notes by deputies at CJC.
I mean, I consider the notes. I don't
Okay.
know that give them any more weight than anything else.
Sure. Was there a concern on your part regarding bias of the deputies making those notes?
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, because, well, and so everybody understands, the deputies at CJC are part of the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, correct?
Yes.
And that's actually the agency that has investigated and is assisting in prosecuting Ms. Stauch.
Yes.
And so, there's always concern for both actual bias and implicit bias. Would you agree with that?
There's bias is always a concern. Yes.
What is implicit bias?
Bias that you're not aware of.
And so deputies, even trying to be fair, may suffer from implicit bias in noting the staff's behavior.
Yes.
And that's something that you consider?
Yes.
When you gave her 2 exams, correct? You gave her the structured interview and what's the other one you did?
MFAST.
MFAST. Let me ask you this. Are you aware of literature indicating that oftentimes people with DID will have elevated scores on the MMPI-2?
Yes.
And what is the MMPI-2?
The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, 2nd edition.
Okay. And I think what you're talking about, and so there is literature that people will have an elevated score on that test. If people who actually suffer from DID will look to be elevated, possibly given that false staining.
There are questions on the MMPI-2 that most people would not endorse that can reflect the experience of somebody with DID. And so it can look like they're exaggerating when it's real.
Do you know, does the MFAST and the structured interview that you did, does that have those same type? Are there any studies indicating that people with DID can have elevated scores on either one of those?
Not that I'm aware of. The questions are not of the same nature that are on the MMPI-2.
What's the difference between the MFAST and the MMPI-2?
Oh, they're totally different tests for different purposes. The MFAST is purely a feigning measure.
Okay. And the structured interview that you performed, that's the SR.
The SIRS 2.
Yes, that has different scales.
Yeah, so it's kind of an expanded version of the MFAST.
Yes. How many different scales does it have?
want to say 6.
Okay. And of those 6, only 1 indicated feigning?
Yes.
The other ones were, I think the other ones were ambiguous towards feigning. And you said, I think you said,
No, I think she only elevated 1 scale.
Okay.
And then the overall index, which considers all the scales, was general indeterminate.
Okay. She indicated there are notes. They're called kites. What's a kite?
A kite is a complaint, a grievance, or a request that an inmate can file to get certain needs met in the jail.
Some of her kites were complaining that the solitary confinement was causing her mental health problems,
I think I read a kite where she was asserting mental abandonment.
and that the solitary confinement eats away at your soul, and your brain feels like something's eating it.
I don't think solitary confinement was the term. Maybe segregated housing.
If you look on page 7 of your report,
Stand corrected.
okay, I'm concerned why mental health does not help me with the solitary confinement is the first line of the kite.
Yes.
And then the second line of the kite is, I thought mental health is an advocate for mental safety. This eats away at your soul, and my brain feels like something is eating it.
That is what the kite says, yes.
Are you aware, or have you found, because I couldn't find any studies relating how solitary confinement could impact either dissociative identity disorder or borderline personality disorder?
Not specific to those disorders. I know that there's plenty of studies on the effects of solitary confinement on the mental health of an inmate,
Yeah.
but I'm not familiar with specific diagnoses.
Right. And I've bizarrely seen some studies that go both ways. Sometimes I've seen studies that indicate solitary confinement can be helpful for people with psychotic features.
I have recently read, there was a large literature on the detriment of solitary confinement for quite a while,
Yep.
and there does seem to be some burgeoning literature that maybe it's not that bad.
And it kind of depends on the different person.
Individual.
Some people have a mental illness, solitary confinement makes them much worse. Some people, it appears surprisingly, with a mental illness, solitary confinement can help them.
Yeah, there's lots of individual differences.
Could somebody who has dissociative identity disorder in different personas, could one of their personas as a defense mechanism try to feign mental illness?
Hypothetically, I imagine so.
Okay. And again, with the feigning, let me go back. Your understanding with dissociative identity disorder, let me say this. My understanding from the literature, when you have a dissociative identity disorder, personas are generally locked in the time that they are created. Are you aware of that?
No, I think that goes beyond my knowledge of the disorder.
Okay. Would you agree? Well, let's just get to that. Let's agree. We were all, the vampire stuff is feigning made up garbage. We can agree with that, can't we?
Your words, not mine.
All right. It almost seems made up garbage in a childlike way, that this is so ridiculous that no intelligent adult would expect anybody to believe it.
I would certainly say it was contrived.
It's contrived and stupid.
I didn't make any opinion as to
Okay.
what kind of intellect it reflected.
And whether or not it could have come from a persona who was locked in a childlike
I
state.
just dismissed it as irrelevant to competency.
Okay. Because it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It was not believable and was not impacting. Justice the Vampire wasn't keeping her from discussing stuff with Miss Strobel.
Correct.
She did indicate that one of the things that would kind of soothe her when she suffered from anxiety was to hide under the covers.
That was more effective than medication, yes.
Okay. I think we covered this a little bit, but in regards to determining, the feigning and the degree, more tests would have been needed in order to be able to do that, correct?
Well, my intention had been to give the MFAST the SIRS if necessary, and had they not indicated any feigning, I would have liked to have given the PAI or the MMPI myself.
Okay.
Given the results of those tests, it didn't seem productive, because if she feigned on those, it was likely she would also invalidate the ones she'd already invalidated in the previous evaluation.
And we had a previous one where and the MMPI 2 is a lengthy test.
The PAI, both of them are. They're over 300 questions each.
Okay. And because we had one prior that was invalid, that would have been waste of the kind of short amount of resources that you have.
Well, just feigning is a dynamic concept. Just because you feign at one point in time doesn't mean you're always feign.
Sure.
So the fact that she'd invalidated it previously didn't mean I necessarily thought she would invalidate it again. But after she did not do well in the measures I gave her, that was an indication that she wouldn't be forthcoming on the test.
When you were discussing things with her and you're discussing with her, oftentimes her thoughts were kind of circular and almost tangential to a degree.
I don't know that her thoughts were circular. Her speech is circular.
Yeah, speech.
I think I portrayed her in my report that she wasn't tangential. She always stayed on topic. She just provided a lot more information. I don't recall having to redirect her. I might have cut her off because she was trying to give me too much information, but I don't recall her being tangential.
And I guess what I'm getting to is I kind
Like she said, she always, give a little bit more information. That's what it's saying about Satan's daughter. That's why I feel she had to tell her daughter Harley on that trip. Whatever the word I'm trying to say. Out there, she had to tell Harley somewhere along the line about what she did. They can't shut up. Blah, blah, blah. They keep talking. I'm just saying. Reason.
of read your report, and if I read it incorrectly, let me know, that you gave some consideration as to whether or not her manner of speech would reflect disorganized thought. And there was they had some similarities in the interview that you had with her, but then you went and listened to the jail phone calls and it didn't seem to be that way. Would that be accurate?
Well, it was those things and the kites where she wasn't making sense.
Yeah.
So I was looking at all of that, and it seemed like with the phone calls, she was able to be very concise, given that there was a time constraint for the phone calls, and had that reflected an actual mental disturbance where there was thought disorganization, she couldn't have just selected to be concise.
Okay. But at least with you, there was some similarities between how she talked and how somebody may talk if they have a disorganized thought process.
No.
No?
She wasn't disorganized.
Okay.
She was organized and garrulous, very, very wordy.
Extra wordy as far as extra information that was not necessarily needed to the questions.
But not irrelevant.
Okay. But the extra information, I mean, that can be an indication of disorganized thought.
If it doesn't make sense.
Okay. And you indicated that a sincere belief that somebody can raise somebody from the dead would not be delusional?
In the context that she provided it with her religious beliefs, that would be correct.
I mean, she seemed to indicate that she believed, like Andrew Womack, that she could raise Gannon from the dead.
Right.
And that wouldn't be consistent with facts, would it?
What fact? Whether or not
Just biology?
I thought you meant the facts of what Andrew Womack claims.
Well, we can
do.
just,
I believe the standard accepted belief is that we cannot raise people from the dead.
Yeah.
It appears there's a faction of religious practices that does, in fact, believe that things like that can happen. And given that she presented that idea in the context of a religious belief, I attributed it to her religious beliefs rather than a delusional belief.
oftentimes people with psychotic disorders have delusions that are religious in nature, correct?
Yes.
So how can it be distinguished between a delusion, which is basis of a psychotic disorder, versus delusion that is based upon religious upbringing?
It's a great question. She believed what other people believed. It's a shared belief.
Okay.
So it's a shared belief specific to that religious organization, or I don't know what the correct term would be. So it didn't have the personal meaning to her outside of the context of that larger religious group. She was in step with what they purport to believe in. Therefore, I consider it to be a religious belief. Whether or not it makes sense to me, whether or not it's rational is a different question. But in terms of looking at the diagnostic criteria, the fact that it's a religious belief shared by other people, and that's the context in which she shared it, it would not be considered pathological.
Would it be pathological, though, considered as to a specific person, not just the belief that the dead can be raised, but that she has that innate ability herself to raise a specific person from the dead?
If she had presented that idea to me without the context of the religion, I would certainly have had more concern. But she said, I know about this guy, and he said he did this, and I tried to find him because I want him to help me too. That's a totally different quality.
But clearly, in people who are raised in very religious upbringing, oftentimes will suffer from psychotic delusions that are based upon religion. That is not uncommon.
But it won't be considered psychotic just because of the beliefs that they hold. If they're just holding their mainstream beliefs within their religion, that would not be considered. It's when they take it to a further level that goes outside of what the mainstream of that religion believes.
Just a moment. Oh, yeah, thank you, Dr. Grimmett. Redirect.
Yes, thank you. Did you consider that she could have just been making this up to make you believe that she was delusional?
Which part?
The part about raising Gannon from the dead.
I considered whether or not it was truly delusional. Did I consider whether she genuinely believed that? That was probably part of my calculus.
When we talk about self-reporting and your interview with her and the reason why you want to look at all the collateral information, is that one of the reasons why? Is sometimes someone who's charged with first-degree murder is going to not be truthful with you in the evaluation because they want to appear to be something they're not.
Yes.
I want to clear something up for the jury. Is the accent from Scotland?
We've been taking bets. The accent's from Scotland.
I just got to keep consistent with all my witnesses, figure out where they're from, so the jury knows that. I want to go back to Mr. Tonini's initial cross-examination when we were talking about trauma, and that trauma is related to post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you recall that line of questioning that he started out with?
Yes.
Are there studies, or in your opinion, are there any timeframes as to when someone might be experiencing delusions or psychosis as a result of trauma?
I don't know that there's a whole lot of research on trauma and psychosis. It is something that happens. It's not part of the diagnostic criteria. So anecdotally, it's something that we see. Trauma itself, the development of PTSD can happen fairly quickly after a trauma happens, or there can be a delayed onset, sometimes up to a couple of years before people start manifesting symptoms. Sometimes not until another traumatic event happens that it all comes crashing down.
This sexual assault that Ms. Stauch was telling you about that occurred between her and the stepfather, did she give you a time frame as to when that happened?
No.
Did you find any collateral resources that it actually happened?
I didn't investigate it.
And is that because it didn't play any relevance to your purpose for the evaluation?
Correct.
Hypothetically thinking, is trauma that happens 20 years ago, is that going to trigger something 20 years from the trauma?
With nothing in between?
Nothing in between.
It wouldn't be typical.
Why?
Well, there would have to be an explanation of what's happening 20 years later that it's an issue now. What was the person able to do, or why was it not impactful at the time? I would just have a lot more questions.
With the trauma that's impacting your psychosis or delusion, whatever we want to call it, would it have to be related to whatever the trauma was to begin with 20 years ago?
No.
Why is that?
The body experiences trauma and it doesn't have the brain to make sense of it. So it's very physical. So the body just responds to the danger, not necessarily the context or the meaning of the danger. So it doesn't matter what kind of trauma it is.
I'm going to end this in a few, but I'm going to fast forward to, cause this, the rebuttal, I guess, whatever it is. But I'm going to fast forward because I want you to hear what the jury's questions. Let me get to what the jury's questions. All right, let me fast forward a little bit. All right. Yeah, I think it was this point.
Dr. Grimmett, can a difficulty or inability to face evidence or to be rigorously honest or to hold oneself accountable for consequences of actions be indicative of mental disability or past trauma-related BPD?
Really long question. Can I ask you to break it into chunks?
Sure. Can a difficulty or inability to face evidence or to be rigorously honest or to hold oneself accountable for consequences of actions be indicative of mental disability or past trauma-related borderline personality disorder?
Okay, I think I can answer that as a whole.
Would it help if you had the question in front of you? Okay. I will need it back.
Thank you. Okay, so the difficulty or inability to face evidence or be rigorously honest or hold oneself accountable for consequences are not signs of a mental illness. That would not reach the level of a mental disability. Can it be indicative of past trauma or BPD? Possibly, but the manifestations of that, the inability to face the evidence and be honest, those would not be considered symptoms of a mental illness that would reach the level of a mental disability.
Okay, and then I need it back so I can read the next question. Everybody knows what it is. Can compulsive lying indicate mental disability?
Compulsive lying is usually associated with an antisocial personality. It would not be a symptom of a mental illness, so it would not reach the threshold of a mental disability.
What does it take for a theory put forth in a psychology peer review publication to become mainstream enough to be published as part of some version of the DSM?
Very good question. My honest answer is the DSM is very political. There are groups of people that want to put forth ideas, and there's committees, and there's voting, and there's agendas, and sometimes it can seem a bit capricious as to what gets accepted and what doesn't. But with enough people endorsing ideas and testing out those theories and seeing that they're accurate and gaining momentum, that helps it become more acceptable in the field and possibly into the DSM.
Is it possible for a person with a great or normal upbringing to have anxiety disorder or to develop dissociative identity disorder?
Anybody can develop anxiety. That's not particular to any kind of upbringing. Certainly people with difficult upbringings tend to have worse outcomes, but people with good upbringings can have anxiety for a variety of reasons. I'm sorry, can you please, the ID piece?
Yes. Is it possible for a person with a great or normal upbringing to have anxiety disorder or to develop dissociative identity disorder?
Dissociative identity disorder is very highly correlated with trauma. So you don't just start to dissociate by having a normal upbringing and nothing bad happened to you. It's generally accepted that the ID comes from some kind of bad event.
All right. I will allow reasonable follow-up as to those questions only. Prosecution?
No, thank you.
Defense? Mr. Tellini?
Good. Sincere belief that people are going to believe me, despite the fact that I have repeatedly lied to them about other stuff, be delusional.
I'm not going to allow that. I'm not sure. Tell me where that fits in on the questions that I've allowed.
The first question about whether pathological lying or refusal to face the evidence in front of you could be signs of
Okay.
mental
All
illness.
right. Go ahead.
I'm going to rephrase the question so I make sure I'm answering it
Yes.
correctly. Is it delusional to believe that despite the fact that I have lied repeatedly, now I think they're going to leave me? Is
Yeah.
that
Can that be delusional in some sense?
I think that practical approach to that would be, it might be irrational, but it doesn't necessarily cross the threshold into a delusional belief. Is it fixed? Or is there any ability to consider an alternate point of view? There's other questions I would need to ask before making a statement about that, but just because something's irrational doesn't mean it's delusional.
Okay. And then as far as the question regarding when does an article become mainstream and in the DSM-5, the DSM-5 actually states that people with borderline personality disorder can suffer psychotic-like symptoms, including hallucination, body image distortions, ideas of reference, and I'm going to say this wrong, hypogenic phenomena during times of stress. I can't say it. Can you pronounce this for me? Let me approach.
Hold on. Let's finish the question. And then I'm not going to allow that question, but you can go ahead and finish it.
Well, and Your Honor, it is asking when the publication become mainstream and in the DSM-5, and it appears that the ideas presented in that article are part of the DSM-5.
Which is a different question than what is being asked. So I'm not going to allow that. So you can, because the question is, what does it take for a theory put forth in a psychology peer review publication to become mainstream enough to be published as part of some version of the DSM? What you're reading sounds like it's from the DSM and is in the DSM. The question here is, what does it take for an article, psychology peer review publication to become mainstream enough to be published as part of the some version of the DSM? So I'm not going to allow that question.
Can I rephrase?
Yeah, sure.
Are you aware that the theory presented in that article had become mainstream enough to be put in the DSM-5?
I'm not familiar enough with the article to speak to whether or not it relates to what's in the DSM-5.
In follow-up, are you aware the DSM-5 indicates people with borderline personality disorder can suffer from hallucinations?
Objection, Your Honor, is to young scope.
No, I'll allow that.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. You may step down. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take our noon recess. If I can have everyone back in place by 1:30, we should be able to start on time.
Let me change the setting so you won't echo. I remembered.
Oh, thank you.
I finally remembered. All right, so Melanie, what would you like to share today? And I see you, Emmanuel, creeping through the back door. Hugs and kisses to you. All right, what you got?
I think we learned a lot of good stuff today.
Oh, yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
So
Mhm.
this doctor was initially hired by the defense for the second competency evaluation because they didn't like the first one. And then they got her competency report and they didn't like that one either.
Oh, so she's kind of like last minute, you saying? Kind of, no?
She let me get my notes and I can tell you the dates. But
Okay. Mm-hmm.
This doctor did the second competency evaluation in, I didn't write the date down. I think in 2021. The first one was done in 2020 and they found her competent to stand trial.
Okay.
And so then her defense attorneys, which aren't these guys, her first defense attorneys went back and said, "Oh, Your Honor, we need a second competency hearing because we disagree. But we're going to need a lot more time." So she got like 30 extra hours, 40 extra hours, because the amount of material was so voluminous. And so this one came back and they didn't like this one either. There's still a third competency hearing.
Oh. Okay.
And she passed all of them. So,
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Go on.
Okay.
Oh.
So today they talked about her little 2-day stint in a Canadian mental institute, but there's no records.
I caught that part. Everybody like, where the records at? Where's the records at? Mm-hmm.
where are the records? And something that kind of hit me was probably in week 2, maybe it was week 3.
Okay.
The state at a sidebar, not a sidebar, but without the jury, presented a disc of financials, and they wanted them brought into evidence, and it was the family's financials for 5 or 6 years. So all you got to do is cross-reference their financials. If she was in Canada, they spent some money somewhere. She didn't walk in with, she couldn't
Okay.
walk in with, $1,000 cash. I don't think you can carry $1,000 over the border. I'm not positive, but
Mhm.
they swiped a debit card, she swiped a debit card, a credit card, something in those 2 days. So if you can find that, but we know for a fact that she only has one stamp in her passport for Canada. And Al said in the first 2 days of his testimony, Al said they drove up to the border and just got their passports stamped. It was just a little adventure. They never went into Canada.
Oh. I need to watch the beginning again of him on the stand. Just repeat that one again. A little bit more of him, because today I really did learn, like, with a part 2. Maybe I'll do that one tomorrow with the other doctor. I forgot the other doctor that comes up.
Torres,
But
Dr. Torres.
correct. I learned a lot. And I'm just sitting there saying, how the heck you didn't know there was something wrong if I keep saying? And it's just like, and then Harley, you know, dodging the questions and, disappearing. They can't find her or nothing. I'm like, you had to know something. And even these therapists are saying that how she talks and she goes on and on too much. She gives more information.
I agree with you. I think Harley knew long before she was arrested. I think her mother
Mhm.
told her at some point. I don't think
Yeah,
Harley had anything to do with it.
correct. Correct.
I,
We're not saying that, but
yeah,
she knew something along the line. Maybe when she walked in that house. 'Cause wait a minute, what happened was she was she was gonna come home and then she told her go get the cleaning supplies, or she came home and then she told her get the cleaning supplies.
they say that she sent her a text, but the
Oh,
girl
yeah.
came home and was home for, I can't remember how long, like 30, 40 minutes, and
Uh-huh.
changed her shirt.
Yeah, when you told me that part, I was like, wait a minute. That
It's-
doesn't add up.
So, I mean, wouldn't she have felt wet carpet at least wet carpet under her feet?
Yeah, because the way that she did this little boy, there had to be blood all over the place.
And she was sending her for the cleaning supplies to clean. So that implies it wasn't cleaned. Harley, did you think it was? I mean, Harley's testimony that day, she said they asked her if it was cold in the basement, and she said, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And then they asked her where she slept, and she slept upstairs in her mom's bed
Yep,
the
that was
fire night.
odd.
And they said, well, why did you do that? Because it was cold in the basement.
But you're gonna leave Gannon downstairs in the cold, right? It
With
just sucks.
open windows, and it's a high of
Uh-huh.
20 degrees. I
Nah,
So
she knew
she
something.
knew something. She knew something, but
Hmm.
I don't think she knew her mom was going to kill him, and I don't think
Right.
she knew she had killed him, but she had to suspect something.
She had to.
Now, is
She
she
did not
scared
know.
to death? Yeah, she
Mm-hmm.
is, and she's young, but I don't. My heart doesn't
Well, I'm
break
just saying
for her. So
she
yeah.
recovered kind of well. She's having herself a good old time. That's all I have to say. But let's
She's
get back into the husband.
oh
Now,
yeah.
hubby, your mama was telling you she needs some meds. There's something wrong with her.
Well,
So, uh-huh. Is it?
well, but that's coming from Letecia. That's what Letecia is saying.
Oh, okay, okay. But the
So
mother
all
works in the medical field, right? The mental something like that. What did she do? The mother-in-law, I think.
she's a psychiatric nurse practitioner.
Mm.
So I need to hear that from somebody besides Letecia. But there was Al. Okay, so the testimony was whenever the psychologist talked to Al did say that things were not going well in their marriage and they had been contemplating separation.
Correct.
Well,
Okay.
if it's not going well in your marriage, don't leave your kid there.
Yeah. I kind of think when she was on the second part of today, I kind of think he was using her like a babysitter. Not saying I'm giving her any credit, saying it's okay what she did, but it just doesn't add up. If you're having
Yeah.
problems, you see she's a little old, why would you leave the kids with her? You running around, you determined to keep the kids away from the mother for whatever reason is. It's just that's why I said it was too much toxicity going on with them. Everybody running around worrying about themselves, arguing and stuff. And I know these children's growing up, in the house, hearing them argue, fighting and fussing. And you hear she even said the daughter said how she would pull her into the arguments and stuff, which I believe that was true. I believe that was true. You know,
100%.
and I'm like, and then you leaving the kids with her, and I know they had to complain. That's why I
Right.
say that, we just have to look at it, the decision us parents make, the kids end up paying for it.
We have to
Unfortunately,
learn
we did the wrong, horrible way. What you gonna say?
to listen to our kids and
Yeah,
validate them. And we can weed through their stories because kids don't always report accurately,
that's
but
true.
we need to sit down with them and listen to them and then open our eyes and verify and make sure. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to blame him, but at the same time, it's just,
hmm No, we just
it's,
calling out with actions that people do, and then how it affects other people, the decisions that you make. That's
yeah,
just what's so sad. Or like the more I'm hearing about, I'm like, I don't think she just started going cuckoo cuckoo right now.
no,
There had to be some sort of signs that something was unstable. And I can see her calling him up, text him, "Oh, I'm so tired with the kids. I can't take this." And I personally don't think she even wanted any kids. She
I
got
don't think
caught
she
out there.
did either.
Yeah, she just got caught out there and had her. Okay. She didn't really want no kids. She got with this
Right,
guy. It was okay because the kids was living with the mother. So she didn't
right.
have to be bothered. So, well, he'll just focus on me, give me money because she's looking for like a little sugar daddy. He'll give me money and take care of my kid because the dad is dead. Then all of a sudden it was like, oh, honey, well, the kids is going to be staying with us. And she like, what? Then she tried, but it was like, I didn't sign up for this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And then it
yeah,
just ended up, out of control. And now the angel is gone.
yeah.
Al said about his mom saying something about Tisa's mental status. So Al did say something to his
I
mom.
think Deb's right. I think Deb's right that there was a discussion. I think in those first 2 days that
Yes, love
um
Joy.
that there's that he something was said when his mom was there,
Yeah, I think I've heard that somewhere. I didn't
but
catch
I
it, but I
can't
heard that
remember
somewhere.
exactly what.
So when Mama, she picked up on it for just visiting that something wasn't right. You didn't know that?
And then you left.
Yeah, and you going off. So my thing is, look, you let the kids go back with their mother, or you just got to get rid of her and just move on. Maybe that's why he had that other woman on the side. He was looking for another woman just
You
to
know,
move on. I don't.
something
Mm-hmm.
something that a commentator said today is
Uh-oh.
that when she researched deep, she dug deep into DID, and she said that for a person to end up with DID, the abuse or the trauma has to have happened by the time a child is 7 to 9 at the latest.
All right,
Do
repeat
you know
that one more
anything?
time. Repeat that again.
Okay, for somebody to end up with DID from abuse or a trauma, it
Okay.
happens in their childhood, and it has to happen. The latest it happens is by age 7 to 9. But Letecia is saying she was 14 when her stepfather did something bad to her.
Oh, I thought it was younger. It was 14 that this happened to her?
Well, it depends on which time she's asked the question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. It always switches up. You just
Before she
don't
was
know.
claiming insanity or after?
Gotcha.
Because before she was claiming insanity, she said it was 14. But then later at her last things, it was 9, 10, 11, 12. But she's a little unsure.
Mm. I love Joy says Al may have known something was wrong with her, but I don't think that he imagined she would kill his child. Exactly. Now, I don't think he was thinking that one. He would
I
never thought this
agree.
could happen. But it was something that she said in the second part of today. She called him a narcissist. And I'm be honest, I don't know. I haven't really listened to him, watch him and stuff. I think he might have a little narcissistic trait. Just a little bit that I'm just hearing about him with the cheating and just running off and just leaving. And he had to hear the signs. It was like it was just about him. He was worried about himself. And sometimes narcissists attract another narcissist. They get in a relationship and they always arguing and fighting and stuff like that. I'm just saying. Not saying he's a killer.
Right,
You could be narcissistic and sociopath, but that don't mean you out here a killer.
right,
No, you don't go that far. That's a whole nother league. But I
right.
think he might be a little bit. I'm just saying, just my thoughts. All right, what Deb has to say here? Yes, he was asked by a detective. Oh, okay. It's too much. So what did the girlfriend come in when he started cheating? When did
I
that?
don't know. I don't
Uh,
know. I do
oh,
know that they say her name is Heather.
oh, they got a
And
name to it. Okay.
yeah, and she was married and she's in the service too. But
Oh gosh, Lord have
right.
mercy. You
But
see what I'm
but
saying?
but Donna, bear in mind that's YouTube gossip. I don't know where I like
Oh,
facts. I like to find them on a court docket and read
mhm.
a statement from the court. I need facts.
That's true. Yeah, because
But
I do try to be careful with certain things because you don't know. You hear this, whatever. So that's why I try to get articles and read it and see something. Say, oh, okay. Well, I read this off, and this is what they said or whatever. Like I said,
yeah,
we're all sharing our thoughts and opinions over here. We don't
yeah,
know. We wasn't there to break bread. We don't know the whole thing. Like I said, when I said that I think that Al might have a little narcissist trait, I don't know. I don't break bread. I'm just going a little bit of what I'm hearing in this trial, certain things. And
right.
even though, Letecia is nuts, but you have to really listen to them. Sometimes they do spill a bit of truth. They just might change it up a little bit, embellish it a little bit, but sometimes they are spilling the truth. And I think when she was sitting there with that FBI agent, that last Friday was explosive. I'm gonna
Well,
try to cover that one on Sunday. I think you was getting some truth from her there. Okay?
I think all of her lies have a little nugget of truth in them.
Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit. You just gotta kind of like dissect it. It's gonna hurt your brain, but you gotta really.
I was going ugly places. I was thinking that some really ugly stuff was going to come out because, 18 stabs, 4 hits to the head, and 3 gunshots isn't ugly.
God.
I thought it was going to get worse,
Well, did they ever
but
find
it's
the
not.
weapons? Did they ever
Pardon?
find the weapons? Did they find the weapons? The
Yeah.
knife? So everything was
Oh,
found.
not the knife. They
Not
don't know that they don't know what the knife was. However, in the dishwasher with those scrub brushes was a pair of scissors and a little nugget in everything she says. She talks about the box cutter. Several times she talks about the box cutter. But she talks about the box cutter and it not cutting all the way through the carpet. So maybe, but they can't find a box cutter. But in that, when they, who was the guy? The guy that did all of her geomapping.
okay.
Was that yesterday morning?
Yeah,
Before
it was
it was,
just there.
yeah, it was, yeah. He shows
That
that
was
she
pretty
drives
good.
up to French Elementary. And I can't remember which day, but she drives up to French Elementary and then right back home. So maybe she threw some stuff away in the dumpster.
Oh, possibility.
So
Now,
I
what
don't,
did
I don't know.
they found the weapon that she used to hit him with. What was that?
No, they don't.
Oh, so that they don't. Oh,
They
only thing
don't.
they have is just a gun, you're saying.
They have the gun.
But everything else they don't
It was
have.
their gun.
Their gun.
And
How can
her
you
DNA
just,
was on it.
God, she was so angry with this child.
She was
Oh,
mad.
that's why I keep saying, Al, don't bullshit me here.
Yeah.
You can't. Excuse my language. I'm not probably cursing over here. But don't BS me. I tell people don't curse. Look at me, right, Melanie? But, it just doesn't add up.
A lot of it doesn't add up. I mean, I don't know. Now
This
look,
poor baby.
the state's gonna rest on Friday.
Oh.
They're gonna be
Okay.
done Friday to Monday morning. They haven't even made it halfway through their witness list.
Wait a minute. Oh, so they got to Friday to complete. That's what you're saying.
Well, they're done. They're saying they're saying Dr. Torres is coming back Friday morning, and Dr. Gray is Friday afternoon, and those are their last two witnesses.
All
But
right.
what
Deb is
they're
saying, I can't wait until Maria comes out in the defense. Who's Maria?
oh
I'm lost.
oh Deb, whew, that's going to be juicy because they say that when she's Maria, she talks with a Spanish accent, but they've got interviews of her pretending to be Maria, and she's not speaking in a Spanish accent.
Oh, wait a minute. You talking about this is one of her personalities.
Yeah, Maria
Oh,
Sanchez.
okay. I just go.
And then this Dr. Lewis, just, I guess, apparently in part of the interview asks her to bring Maria out, and boom, Maria comes out. I don't think it works that way. Oh, the other thing about this Dr. Lewis, part of her claim to fame, she also runs an EEG and an MRI in her diagnosing them, right? So that she can show the brain trauma. They withdrew their request for that. She never did it on Letecia.
Oh, interesting.
No MRI, no EEG. She's gonna have some difficult times. And if you look at all the cases that she's testified for, they didn't go well for the defendant. So I'm not too worried.
So do y'all feel that she's definitely gonna be guilty? She's not gonna win? Get what she wants? I don't know.
I think she's gonna get guilty and sane. I don't think they're gonna find her insane. Now,
Guilty
if they find her insane, a mental hospital is a state mental prison is a really ugly place for somebody who's sane. But in Colorado, she has to be reviewed every 12 months. That doctor sitting on that stand right there is a doctor from the Colorado State Mental Hospital, right where Letecia would be sent. They're already saying she's not insane. So in 12
okay.
months,
Thank you for sharing that one. So if they say she does get what she wants, whatever, this person is the person that's supposed to be the one that's gonna check her every 12 months to see if she's okay or not to go back out in society.
it's a group of these doctors, and so it's this
Oh yeah, I
doctor,
know.
Dr. Gray, Dr. Torres. Oh, I'm looking at my list.
Oh, Lovejoy, you on point with this. I just couldn't break it down. Yes, Lovejoy. Yes, he has narcissistic traits and they tend to attract borderlines. Bingo. Yeah, this is so true. And we all sharing our thoughts and opinions. Thank you for throwing it out there.
Yeah. Good observation there. So these are the same doctors that are saying she's sane that are going to be in charge of her review in 12 months. And then, my understanding is in Colorado, in 12 months, if they say, yeah, she's sane, then she walks out the door. She's free.
Oh, and that's the goal that she's trying to get. That's what
Yeah.
she wants to get. Mm,
I could get on board with some insanity for her if they were going to keep her for the rest of her life.
I understand
They're
exactly.
not.
She can't go back out in the streets because she'll do something like this again to somebody. That was just too horrific what she did to that baby. And this is a child.
Yeah.
No, she'll do something else. She'll go up the street, but she definitely has some sort of mental issues with the devil's help too. And this is so sad when everybody says, when they have mental illness, we have to worry about mental illness. Yeah, mental illness is deep, but then some of the time when these people doing these crimes, I don't even think it's mental illness. I think they just straight up work for the devil. Because you have so many people walking around with all these different mental illness, but they're not out here thinking about killing people. They might want to hurt themselves. You know what I mean? But
Right.
they can't even think of the thought of harming an animal, a child, another person.
So I came back really early in the trial. I sort of dug in on what Judge Darrow said to Daryl Brooks about
Mm.
mental illness, and that bipolar is not
Mm.
a mental illness that's a get out of jail free card. She talked about clients she has represented being
Mhm.
so schizophrenic and
Mhm.
things that they had done, and they truly, in the moment they did it, did not know the difference between right and wrong.
You remember when I covered that girl Shabusiness or whatever it was, the one who flipped out around Valentine's Day on her lawyer?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Now, I think she might have this condition. Cause don't you remember when she flipped out and she was on the floor? She said, "What happened?" They said, "You just attacked your lawyer." She's like, "Oh." Remember, she snapped, and I believe she was telling the truth. She really did not realize she's on the floor. All these people on. She's like, "What happened? You attacked your lawyer." And I really do think she didn't realize what she did.
The crime that she committed, it was horrific.
Oh my gosh! When I was doing the research, I watched. I said, "Whoa, what channel was? I think it's Beyond Evil. I think channel he broke it down. I could be wrong. I can't remember what channel it was, but he broke it down like behind the scenes. I didn't know all this. And another thing too is, ladies and gentlemen, just stay away from drugs. They was just sitting
Yeah.
there getting high into that kinky sex. I mean, hey, I don't judge nobody in the bedroom. Do what y'all want to do. But he was messed with somebody who she was a little bit off to be doing these kind of things. And she cut his head off, didn't she? And a couple other body parts. And mama come downstairs, see her son's head in a bucket. What?
It was gross. I mean, and ugh. Well, we have this going on out here. I'm in Idaho, and I think everybody knows about Michael Vaughn, the little boy that went missing a couple years ago. And I mean, they live 20 minutes from me, 30 minutes from me.
Oh.
They dug up the backyard of the girl's house, and they arrested her, but she immediately had to go to the loony bin. She was deemed incompetent, and she's been arrested. She's been in for almost a year now. Well, they have just deemed her competent to assist in her defense, and then the DA dropped the charges.
Wait a minute. What is this? The story with Michael Vaughn? Is a little boy?
Little boy, little Michael Vaughn, Monkey Vaughn.
All
So
right,
the DA, they don't have a body, but they had, when they dug up the backyard, they have evidence that his body had been in the backyard. So Sarah Wondra, which she's not related to the family. The family doesn't know her and her husband, none of it. 2 of their roommates are out of state and are refusing to come back. And the husband was already in jail, and it's questionable as to if they did something. but she was crazy. I think whatever she saw made her crazy. But she's still being held because they came up with some gun charges. So she's still in jail. But they did dismiss the charges about Michael Vaughn for now. So
All right, let me show this little quick clip here since you brought this up real quick. It's about less than 3 minutes. Hang in there, y'all. Let's listen to this. I didn't know
this
about
is
this
good.
story.
Yeah.
A grieving community, reeling from the disappearance of the 5-year-old Michael Vaughn last July, now potentially one step closer to finding closure.
We are all very emotionally tied to this case, just as our community is. I would say probably the country.
Fruitland Police Chief J.D. Huff spoke with us Sunday afternoon about a credible tip he says led authorities and rescue crews to dig up the backyard of a house in connection with Michael's death. Huff said on Monday that credible tip came from someone inside of the house.
We received a search warrant, and we started excavating the backyard of this residence due to the fact that there's potential for Michael's remains to be in this backyard.
Here's a map of the area. The house is just 4 minutes from the Vaughn family home. Police arrested 35-year-old Sarah Wandra over the weekend, who lived in the house being searched. She's charged with failure to report a death. Wandra appeared via...
Oh, God, what was that? Oh,
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Let me finish. Oh, gosh.
Zoom for an arraignment Monday afternoon in Paso County.
It is alleged that you did on or about the 12th day of November of this year here in the state of Idaho fail to notify the coroner of a death, the death of Michael Vaughn, with the intent to prevent the discovery of the manner of death. That is a felony here in the state of Idaho. Do you understand the allegation that's been made against you?
I understand what they've said is not correct.
A prosecutor said Wandra is already on pretrial release, charged with unlawful possession of a firearm in Idaho. Court records show she was convicted of felony attempted robbery in Oregon in 2013.
I think it shows that she's a danger to the community.
A Paso County judge set Wandra's bond at $500,000. KTVB obtained the criminal complaint in the case, but the judge decided to seal the probable cause affidavit and other records. The judge, prosecution, and defense agreed. They do not want to jeopardize such a high-profile case. Chief Huff says they've fielded more than 1,500 leads. Police have not said whether they've found Michael or his remains yet. The chief told us they plan on excavating the entire backyard and digging 3 to 4 feet down.
This is arduous work. It's going to take us a while to get this done, but we're not going to stop.
Okay. So that's real quick. What is she to him?
Nothing. No relation. They don't know them. Nothing.
So just like
Nothing.
a complete stranger just took this kid and did blank blank.
Right. Her husband's quite questionable. And so were their roommates. Oh, the person that lives next door to them is on the special registry list.
Oh gosh. Oh,
So, and they were renting, and the police said they would that they were going to get a search warrant for their backyard, and the owners of the house walked right up and said, "Oh, we own the property. You need no search warrant. Go for it."
Woo!
They found nothing on the property. Nothing. But they do have evidence that Michael was at one point buried in the Wandra's backyard.
Oh,
So, but they've dropped those charges, and she's only sitting on the gun charges now.
oh.
But they dropped them. I think it's with prejudice, so they can refile them later. And that's good. That's good, because you want her to be tried in a fair trial, and you want it to be good evidence that will convict her. Because if she gets a not guilty, you can't go after her a second time. You don't get a second bite of that apple. So if you don't have the evidence, we've watched people get extradited from other states. If they had anything on those other two guys, they would extradite them back into Idaho.
Oh, okay. I'm
So
gonna read
I
on
don't.
that one. I'm gonna read up on that one. I didn't hear
Yeah,
about that story. Nope.
it's been going on for a long time. So I think it's going to go down as one of those that are unsolvable.
And Lovejoy, yes, Joe Doro, she did great. Oh my gosh, at the end. Ooh, when she broke down Sore Rat. You go, girl. So
Yeah,
either maybe I'll do it tomorrow. I don't know, tomorrow evening, whatever. I just wanted to show this. If I was gonna show the other part of today of day 15, I just wanted to show the clips when she was, talking to the therapist. I was just gonna show those clips, not all the other stuff, just to watch her, because I didn't get a chance to even finish seeing the whole thing, but I just wanted to show those clips. 'Cause I thought it was very interesting, and like I said, when you really listen to them, they actually are going to be telling you some sort of truth. Just kind of hard. You got to dissect it, and it's going to hurt your brain trying to figure it out too. Oh my gosh, it'll hurt your brain. All
they
right,
also this afternoon they gave the judge gave Letecia the voir dire over testifying and her rights and what could happen and what can't happen. So he did all that with her this afternoon.
wait a
But
minute. Say it again. I'm lost. The judge did. I missed the ending.
the judge had his conversation with her about after the jury was gone about her right to testify and her right to stay silent, and that it's a big decision and it can't be held against her if she chose to stay silent. But if she chose to testify, she has to answer the questions. And that her attorney can't make the decision for her. It's her decision to make. He went through all of that with her. But
So
they
wait a
didn't
minute.
say whether.
You telling me she wants to testify?
No, in every case, the judge has to have that conversation. I think it's called
Oh,
a
okay.
grillo.
Oh, okay. Because
The-
I know that they offer. I just okay. I misunderstood. I was about to say because I don't think that she wanted to testify. I didn't think she wanted to get up
yeah,
on that stand. Oh, but the judge was just saying it just in case if you want to, whatever, blah blah blah. You got your right, but this is the rules, and you have to
that's what he
follow it.
did. So he did that today after court. So now I've got this. I've got the defense witness list.
Okay. You don't play, girl. You don't
They've
play.
got. I don't play, baby.
You sure do. Love it, love it, love it.
They've got. They've got a couple experts, but they've got all of her family. They've got a Kenny Ray Harden, which I think that has to come from her dad's side of the family, if it's not her father. And they've got Dee Dee, but then the rest of these I'm going to read.
Hello. I think you dipped out. We don't hear no sound from you. Do y'all hear me? Oh, I think she must have got cut off. All right. Deb says, Donna, you will love watching Dr. Torres. She was great. Yeah, because I didn't get a chance to watch the whole thing. But I know I have a sewer rat video for tomorrow. Oh Lord, I think it's like 7:30. If I do, it's gonna be after the sewer rat, or maybe I'll do it Friday. I don't have no plans Friday. You know what, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm gonna do the part 2 on. I don't know. Just wing with me. Follow me. Just see what we do. I don't know. But I want to show those clips of her in the, talking to the therapist. And I also want to go back until last week Friday because that was deep. Melanie, you coming back? You coming back? Oh, we lost it. My internet dropped. Oh, okay. You coming back? No, it might not be able to. All right. But thank you, Melanie, again. Once again, thank you for the tidbit. Thank you for everything, for the stuff. Okay, so you hear me. Okay. And this is, oh my gosh, this is awful. This is so sad. This poor angel. Oh my gosh. All right, ladies, I'm not gonna hold you no longer, but thank you for being here. Thank you again, Melanie. And like I said, it might be tomorrow evening, but I know I had sore rat. Maybe I'll push up sore rat earlier because I do want to finish the rest of definitely do the afternoon stuff. Oh, okay. The other part, because I didn't see the whole thing. I want to see that one for the jumpsuit. So, you know what? I'll just do it tomorrow. instead of doing it Friday. But I'm gonna zoom through it. No, well, I'm gonna cut through it. Just gonna show her because I don't want to put on too much fast speed with her talk because it might be too hard to understand what the heck is she saying. That kind of thing. And matter of fact, everybody put up some blue hearts for the angel. And we're going to call it a night. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for hitting the like. Thank you for voting. Let me see. Did we get any more votes? Let me read it one more time. Let's see. Oh, the votes went up a little bit. All right. We have 15 votes now. 15 votes now. Why do you think Harley didn't want to talk to the psychologist? Dun, 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 dun. 67% said Donna, she had something to hide. 20% said, not sure. 13% said, she is young, Donna. Okay, she's young. All right. I'll try to lay off, but I can't. So I won't. All right, let me stop, y'all. Everybody have this as a good night and a blessed one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging. And remember, like I always say, date smart, not thirsty. Be careful who you bring into your home. Not everybody comes in your life with good intention. And especially be careful who you bring around your children. Okay? And as parents, teach our children not to date dusty. And teach the boys, stay away from these dustettes because they're no good. Yeah, I said it. Everybody have a blessed night. Bye.